So, we meet again, Mr. Bond. An entire year later. Hello, folks, and welcome back. Here I am. I'm following up my last video, which was the video on James Bond that I did, where I spoke about my history with the character and how I got to know the character and the franchise and so forth. And of course, the acquisition of Bond by Amazon, where I spoke extensively about that. So this will be the follow-up, part two, so to speak, of my James Bond story. And this part, I'm just going to be reviewing the entire Bond series, all the official Eon films, and I'll also talk about the unofficial Bond films. Never Say Never Again and Casino Royale. I do not own the unofficial Casino Royale movie, but I have seen it, and I'll just mention that in passing, really. As I approach, the end of, I would say, the Sean Connery era. I'm just going to provide a quick 5-minute thought on each film. This is unscripted, unrehearsed. It'll be from the top of my head. It will be edited, of course, just to cut out the ramblings and trim the fat, so to speak. But that's how I will structure this whole video. So I'll start off with Sean Connery and George Lazenby first, and I'll mention the Casino Royale unofficial adaptation. Then I will continue on with all the other actors and their films. So let's begin. Okay, so let's start off with the first James Bond film ever made, Dr. No, starring Sean Connery. The first Bond film released theatrically. Sean Connery's pretty much, this is his star-making role. I mean, playing James Bond. Prior to this, Sean Connery didn't have a whole lot on his resume, but once he done James Bond, everything changed, and it's been all uphill from there, really. Well, there's been ups and downs, really, with Connery's career. May he rest in peace. Fantastic actor. And Dr. No, when you watch it today, it is still entertaining, but it does have a lot of rough edges to it, especially in the socio-political context. There's just some things in this that today, the social norms in particular, they just wouldn't fly. It just wouldn't fly today. Without getting too much into it, there's just a lot of stuff in it that's like, ooh, that's just not good, is it? But taking away that, there is still a lot of good mystery and intrigue in this first movie that Connery did. So I'm just going to read the plot summary back here on the back panel. His name is Bond, James Bond, and here in his explosive film debut, Ian Fleming's immortal action hero blazes through one of his most spectacular adventures. Sean Connery embodies the suave yet lethal cool of Agent 007 as he battles the mysterious Dr. No, a scientific genius bent on destroying the US space program. So that's the plot, effectively, and it's a pretty entertaining movie. I wouldn't call this the best James Bond film, but it's a decent start, I would say. A decent start. And Connery's excellent. I like Jack Lord as Felix Leiter. You got two of the coolest guys of the 60s in this movie, effectively. You got Connery, who was in a star-making role, and you got Jack Lord from Hawaii Five-0. How cool is that? I don't know if any of you know of Hawaii Five-0. Well, it was rebooted not too long ago, in fact, and that did, I think, like 5-6 seasons. So, some people might know Hawaii Five-0, I'm sure. A lot of the older generation. I knew Hawaii Five-0 mainly because of my dad. My dad used to watch it, and he would show me a few episodes. So I kind of knew Jack Lord through that. And when I saw him in Dr. No, I was like, oh, cool. You got Jack Lord and Sean Connery. That's cool. And both of these men were very stylish in this movie. And of course you have Ursula Andress, who's the Bond girl for this. And, this is one of the cases where there's been a lot of talk, of course, about the Bond girls not being strong and capable enough, and Bond treating him like shit, the misogyny, etc. And yeah, in these early Bond films, there is a bit of that. But as the Bond films do progress, however, you start to see a bit more agency come through. We started to see a bit more of that as it went along, which is a natural progression. In fact, watching the Bond films is really cool because it's not just watching a movie. You're kind of seeing time change and social norms change if you look at the Bond movies that way, they're actually very good, like, cultural time capsules. So if you're not going to watch the Bond films for the stories, really, I recommend watching them for the moment in time they were made, because they're really good time capsules. But I'm going to be reviewing these as films. You know, they're not just great time capsules, but I think there's still a lot of merit to the stories. The villains are colourful. The story has got a lot of intrigue. Connery is excellent. There's some very suspenseful moments. And, you know, Ursula Andress is absolutely stunning. You know, she is iconic in this movie. And she's also got some moments where I think there's a lot of depth to her, you know, considering the time it was made. So when you look at it for the time, yes, there are some things that are problematic about it, but there are also some hints of depth to the character. So I do think it's unfair to write her off as completely shallow, because that's not the case. But some people have, you know, on the internet at least, they just do their rants and whatnot. But anyway, Dr. No, a solid entry, but it has some rough edges, mainly with its production and especially the sound. The sound is awful, you know, and the music isn't very good. Aside from the main Bond theme by Monty Norman, which is iconic, the rest of the music just isn't very good. It's got a lot of... it sounds like stock adventure music from the decade prior. This was made in '62, and the music sounds like it's from the mid-1950s. You know, stuff you'd hear from like a John Wayne film, perhaps, maybe a early Hitchcock film. It just doesn't feel like the James Bond music that we'll hear later on after this. When John Barry comes into the picture in the next film, that's when Bond's music starts to have its own identity. Here, we're not hearing it. But still, an entertaining watch, but it has a lot of rough edges, and there are better entries that come after this. So, out of 5, I give Dr. No a 3 out of 5. Entertaining, it's got mystery and intrigue. Connery's great, Jack Lord is great, and even some of the supporting characters, like the character Quarrel, is likable. So, and the villain, Dr. No, Joseph Wiseman, does a good job, you know, in the role. He's a mysterious character, you know, they really build him up, and I think it pays off for the most part, even if the finale's a bit typical and cheesy, but still good, really entertaining, solid start. Now, the follow-up to Dr. No was 1963's From Russia with Love, the second film starring Sean Connery as James Bond. And this one is a lot more polished. We're now starting to see, you know, okay, the first one was the introduction. This one is just building on that and bumping up the production quality. And without question, the production is much better on this one. And with it, I think they had a bigger budget slightly. And it shows. This is a lot more polished. And this movie has a very Alfred Hitchcock style to it in terms of the way it's filmed, especially the finale, and even some of the acting style. But overall, a very intriguing entry. And I didn't like this one at first when I was growing up, when I started watching Bond, but as I've gotten older, I've really grown to appreciate it, and it's a very good story. This one doesn't have a whole lot of action, though, so that's my main criticism of From Russia with Love. There isn't a whole lot of action, and when the action arrives, it's still very basic and not the best, I don't think. I mean, the boat chase was okay at the end, I guess. But I'll read the story, you know, what it's all about at the end. Sean Connery returns as James Bond in this thriller-minute adventure featuring remarkable villains, beautiful women, and exotic locales. This time, Bond squares off against the evil Spectre organization in a race to seize the Soviet Lecter decoding machine, thrusting him into a thrilling boat chase, a brutal helicopter attack, and a deadly brawl aboard the Orient Express. That brawl is amazing. That is one of the best fight scenes in any James Bond film, and the scene I'm talking about is that there's a villain in this movie, well, a henchman assassin, really, named Red Grant, a Soviet agent, and played by Robert Shaw. And Bond and him have this excellent sequence on a train where Robert Shaw has him at gunpoint and Bond is almost begging for his life effectively. But Grant toys with him. He plays with him. He really enjoys bringing Bond to his knees. And Bond has to use his wits in this scene. And when the fight finally breaks out, it's still amazing. It's so realistic and believable. It's just brilliant. It's a great fight sequence. The Bond girls in this are still very much typical of their time, but they are interesting. Tatiana Romanova, of course, is a very iconic Bond girl, very intriguing. And I do think Connery and her have some very good chemistry. But it really is, this one's more built on mystery, and this one's more intrigue rather than mystery, because the story is really well told and all the pieces that fall into place that lead to the finale are really exciting and intricate. I really like the way this movie's been structured. It is slower, but it's interesting. This is almost like noir, film noir James Bond at times. It has a mixture of film noir and the Hitchcock style, if that makes sense. We are also introduced to Q in this film. I think he is in the first one, but it wasn't played by Desmond Llewellyn. Yeah, I think Q did show up in the first one and give Bond his Beretta, his new handgun, because he had a Beretta in the first one. He got his Walther PPK in Dr. No. But Q, as we know him, played by Desmond Llewellyn, who would play Q throughout the series up until Brosnan's third film, The World Is Not Enough, and unfortunately Desmond Llewellyn passed away. But anyways, back to From Russia with Love. Q's appearance gives Bond his attaché case with the exploding talcum powder, the throwing knives, and the sovereigns, the gold sovereigns, that he tries to use to bribe Robert Shaw to spare his life. We see that in here, and it's really the beginnings we're starting to see of what would happen from Goldfinger onwards, the third film. But like I said, there is not much action in this, and when the action scenes, aside from the fight scene on the train, when the action scenes do come along, like the helicopter chase, which is really cheesy and not very well done, they're not, that's an example. The helicopter chase is pretty bad. And the boat chase is okay at best, but I do like the fight on the train. But the intrigue, the story, the performances, Connery is even more refined in this. He's still playing it tough like in Dr. No, but with a bit more refinement. And the production quality is nicer. This is very much a Cold War movie. Like, it really captures the zeitgeist of that time with the Soviet Union and whatnot. So it really is an iconic film, and I think it's very good. I give this one a 4 out of 5, and it was even more successful than Dr. No. If From Russia with Love was a blazing success, the next film, Goldfinger, which came out in 1964, again, the following year, was just a juggernaut. This was massive. Based upon what I've read, this is the one that made Bond internationally recognized massively. He was already known, with those first two, but this one, all the elements that we know, the henchmen, the Bond girls, the gadgets, the clothes, the locations, this is the movie that started the James Bond formula proper, the cinematic Bond. Because Connery in this one has a lot more humor to him. He's a little bit lighter. He's still tough, but he's kind of wound down the grit and a bit of the cruelty a little bit. Make no mistake, there's still some rough edges to him, but it was just a lot more refined, and we start to see a bit more humor, a lot more suaveness. His clothes fit him better. Everything is immaculate in this movie, and the Bond villains are a lot more interesting and ambitious. So let's talk about the story here. From the opening bomb blast outside a steamy nightclub to a last-minute escape from the president's personal jet, James Bond's third on-screen adventure is an exhilarating, pulse-pounding thrill ride. Sean Connery returns as 007 and faces off with a maniacal villain hell-bent on destroying all the gold in Fort Knox and obliterating the world economy. There you go. quite a story there, and it's really well done. To quote Roger Ebert, Goldfinger is the best of all the Bonds. That's what Roger Ebert said on the back of his little review here, a little piece of the review that's been put back here. And yeah, Goldfinger, without question, is one of the best Bond films ever made. It isn't perfect, it isn't airtight, but no movie's airtight. I could even poke holes at, Casino Royale with Daniel Craig, which I thought was airtight. It was the best. But now that I've seen it again recently, even that one has faults, but only if I really dig. That's the same with Goldfinger. There's only faults with it when I start to really dig at it. And you've seen it maybe a few too many times. You start to notice things. But that's the thing. If you don't notice the problems on the first or second go, that's the sign of a good film, I believe. It's when you start really noticing problems with story, logic. When there's too many of those, that's when you know a film is falling apart. Goldfinger, on the other hand, within the reality of this movie, sticks to its rules, and that's why it's an excellent Bond film. Goldfinger is a very interesting and compelling and charismatic villain with his whole plan to destroy the whole gold reserve, to obliterate the world economy by destroying the gold in Fort Knox. A very, very good story, a very good concept. His henchman, Oddjob, is silent but memorable, and he's incredibly dangerous. Harold Sakata plays it well. He really has a strong screen presence. And the fight with him and Sean Connery, is another classic fight. Maybe not quite as good as the fight sequence in From Russia with Love, but it's memorable in another way because Oddjob is more of a superhuman kind of character, whereas the fight in From Russia with Love is between, two men who are really professional at what they do. It felt more grounded in reality. This one's almost not quite fantasy, but it's bordering on fantasy a little bit. But still good. I really enjoy it. I love this is where Bond gets his Aston Martin for the first time, the DD5. Classic car, still looks great to this day. Lots of gadgets. Great chase scene. Even with its technical limitations, it's still very good. Lots of great humor in this. Of course, when he electrocutes the guy in the bathtub, shocking, positively shocking. And, excuse me, I've got to say it like Sean Connery. Shocking, positively shocking. Goldfinger, and of course we have the Bond girl, Pussy Galore. Yeah, I know, we don't name the Bond girls with those suggestive names anymore, but the character's great. I mean, Pussy Galore is a very, very, for the time particularly, a very strong character, very, very effective, and she's not easily swayed by Bond. So, in some ways it's forward-thinking and considering the time it was made in. But again, it's still a film from the 60s. So there are some limitations to what they were doing with female characters back then. But still, it was a step forward, especially from the last two. And overall, I give Goldfinger a 5 out of 5. A very, very polished film, beautifully made. Love the locations, the villains, the story. Connery at his peak. Magic. Check it out. So naturally, after Goldfinger's success, they had to give us another one. And that came out in 1965, and it was called Thunderball. Thunderball... I don't like this one. Thunderball has its fans, but it's very split. Especially now, it's 50-50. Some people really love it, some people don't really like it. I don't like this one at all. It's not the worst Bond film, but it's not a good one in my opinion. And it's not like the story is bad. The story is fine, but it's just the way the story is told. And the movie is slow, sluggish. The villains aren't very good. And the action, surprisingly, is piss poor. Like, it really is. I mean, aside from the underwater action sequence, there really isn't a whole lot to recommend with Thunderball. Connery's still very good in it, and the Bond girl Domino is okay, but really that's it. And You know, we do have a really good theme song by Tom Jones, at least. And the music, I forgot to mention, in Goldfinger was done by Shirley Bassey. The theme song, Goldfinger, is iconic. And Thunderball by Tom Jones is also pretty good. Before that even, we got John Barry now came on board. So sorry, I got to go back a little bit. But from Russia with Love, Bond's composer, the one that fans know and love, John Barry, appeared on the scene. And from Russia with Love onwards, he has been doing all the Bond music. And he delivers another stellar soundtrack on this. But anyways, Thunderball as a movie just isn't very exciting. So I'm just going to read the back panel here as per usual. The thrills never let up as James Bond dives into a riveting adventure filled with explosive confrontations and amazing underwater action sequences. Sean Connery brings his characteristic style, humor and magnetism to 007 as he travels to Nassau to track down the villainous criminal Emilio Largo, who is threatening to plunge the world into nuclear holocaust. Again, another Spectre villain. Of course, we had Dr. No, of course, from Spectre, and now we got Emilio Largo, etc., etc. So Spectre is the organization that's like Bond's nemesis, big nemesis during this period. And we've had Spectre come back, of course, in the Craig films. This just, as a movie, isn't very exciting. The story isn't necessarily bad. I mean, Emilio Largo, who works for Spectre, hijacks some nuclear weapons to hold the world hostage, basically. That's really it. That's the whole plot. But there isn't a whole lot of excitement in this movie. It's just a very slow and plodding film, and it takes too much time to get to the point of the story, and we constantly revisit things that we already know, and the processes of how Bond goes to figure out all of Largo's dealings, you know, and Spectre's dealings. So it's just a lot of running in circles, I feel, with this movie. Granted, Connery is excellent. He still has the humor, the charm. That's what keeps it interesting, at least. And, of course, Domino is a good Bond girl. And we do get some gadgets, I guess. But really, the action, to me, is nothing to write home about, especially in the finale, where you see some really bad rear projection during this boat sequence, this boat action sequence. It's awful. It really isn't a very good entry in my opinion, but this was the highest grossing Bond film to that point, and it makes sense because Goldfinger was a tremendous success. Thus the marketplace for another Bond film was created. The demand was there, so Thunderball was going to make money regardless on whether it was as good as Goldfinger or not. I can only give this 2 stars, and the only that's generous, but I give it 2 stars for a couple of reasons. Music's great. Connery and the Bond girl Domino are really good. And there's some, you know, nice locations as well, and some memorable moments here and there. But honestly, the story is just not well told. The Bond villain Largo isn't very interesting or exciting or charismatic, very bland. And the action scenes aren't much to write home about, even on a technical level, which doesn't make sense considering the budget went up on this one. So Thunderball is not one that I revisit very often. But there are worse entries than Thunderball, so 2 out of 5 for Thunderball. Now, after Thunderball, it took 2 years for the next Bond film to come out. And oddly enough, there were 2 Bond films out in 1967. The official Bond film, You Only Live Twice, and there was the unofficial adaptation of Casino Royale with David Niven. Now, I will briefly talk about Casino Royale with David Niven. I have not watched that movie in 15 years, 20 years maybe. All I remember was that it was a mess. It had several directors and writers, and it was more of a spoof. There was several James Bonds throughout the movie. It was a parody. It had David Niven, Woody Allen, Ursula Andress was in it as well, which is crazy. And it was just a mess. The making of that movie, I saw a documentary on it some time ago. Well, an online, retrospective, I should say. And it sounded like a hodgepodge of hell. Like, that's more interesting than the actual movie. But it wasn't very good. That movie was terrible from my memory. And it wasn't even funny as a spoof. Just awful. So I don't recommend it. Based upon what I remembered, it was a 0-star movie. It's terrible. But anyways, let's forget about the 67 version of Casino Royale, the unofficial one, and get to the main Bond film here, which is You Only Live Twice. And You Only Live Twice was the first James Bond film that I saw growing up all the way through. And it's the one I selected because I thought it had a great title, and it's still my favorite James Bond film to this day. I see You Only Live Twice as the perfect, fantastical Bond film. The other ones to that point were mostly based in reality to an extent, with some, fantasy. But this one dipped its toe a little further into it. Although it didn't get to a point where it was absolutely absurd, which is what came later. But anyways, You Only Live Twice came out in 1967, and interestingly enough, the screenplay was by the author Roald Dahl. That's right, Roald Dahl, the guy who wrote the Big Friendly Giant, the BFG, and Matilda, of all things, worked on the screenplay to this. But anyways, let's read the back panel here of the story. A disaster in space pushes humankind to World War III, and only James Bond can prevent it in this magnificent pull-out-all-the-stops movie spectacular. Sean Connery returns as 007, who travels to Japan to stop the evil Spectre organization and its diabolical leader, Ernst Stavro Blofeld, Donald Pleasance, from instigating global warfare from his massive headquarters in an inactive volcano. So this is the one that, if that sounds familiar to you, Blofeld, the inactive volcano lair, of course, Austin Powers parodied this. This is the one where we see Blofeld, Donald Pleasance's character here, the bald guy with the cat, and we get all sorts of gadgets in this. Probably one of my favorites is the helicopter Little Nelly, which I think is one of the best action sequences in any Bond film. It's at least one of the best from Connery's era. And I love this movie. It's just perfectly fantastical. The story I actually really enjoyed. Connery, though, in this one, I will admit, seems less interested and invested than he was previously. I think he was getting bored with the character by this point. This one definitely delved into fantasy, but it didn't get to the point of like Moonraker or Die Another Day. It was kind of skirting the line, blurring the line a bit. But it was still very interesting and intriguing. We have two Bond girls here, and I like these Bond girls a lot. I think the first one's better, though. Aki, she's really cool. I think she has a lot of what I would call sly charisma, if that makes sense. She's a bit cheeky, this girl. And she's very capable in her own right. And I really like that character. She's really likable as well. There are some things that are problematic with this, mainly with James Bond. When he goes to Japan, he wears a Japanese disguise where they put makeup on him to make him look Japanese, which I know it's supposed to be a disguise, but God, no, we just don't go there. It's terrible. They should not have done that. And it's not even convincing either. Bond looks like Mr. Spock. It's terrible. I don't know why they did that. But yeah, taking that away though, this has got some great iconography, gadgets, the helicopter chase, the volcano lair, the sets are amazing. The music in here is excellent. John Barry's music, this is one of my favorite scores, if not my favorite score to any Bond film. And the song by Nancy Sinatra, You Only Live Twice, is my favorite Bond song. It's such a great song. It makes you feel good, but it also makes you think about, it makes you think a little bit. You have one life for yourself, one for your dreams. That line always stuck with me. It's just very inspirational. I never would thought I would say that with a Bond song, because a lot of them just are there to be connected to the movie. But this one's actually a little different, and I thought it was a bit more, philosophical, if you will, and more thought-provoking. And it's a very nice melody. This to me is the perfect kind of fantasy Bond. This is the one that I go to when I need to put myself in a good mood, because I don't need to take everything so seriously. This is the one I go to because it's perfect escapist Bond, fantasy. This one's really good, and there's nothing wrong with that. Some people prefer the more serious Bonds, some people prefer the lighter Bonds. I like them both, but they have to be done well, and You Only Live Twice done it really well. Moonraker, on the other hand, and Die Another Day did not. This one did. This one and Octopussy. I even like Octopussy. Yeah, sue me. But You Only Live Twice, 5 out of 5 as a perfect escapist Bond film. I like this and Goldfinger equally. They are my two favourite Connery Bond films. You Only Live Twice has more nostalgia for me because that's the one that I chose on my own, grew up watching and loving. It was a great gateway Bond film for me. So after You Only Live Twice, which made money, I think it made a slightly less than Thunderball, but still enough to be considered profitable. After You Only Live Twice, Connery leaves saying he wants to do other things. He's done with James Bond and they had to find somebody else. Enter George Lazenby, the Australian model who basically conned his way into playing Bond. He claimed he had acted in many different countries. There's a long story to it. I won't explain it, but he ended up convincing the producers that he was the right guy for the job. The classic case of fake it till you make it. That's what he did. And I kind of like that story. And I like that story about Lazenby. But Lazenby as Bond, another story. Not very good. But I'll read the plot line here. James Bond goes undercover in the treacherous Swiss Alps in this action-packed epic filled with artillery-laden ski pursuits, incredible stunts, and non-stop thrills. George Lazenby steps into the role of Agent 007 with supreme confidence and undeniable charisma. I don't know about that. He even finds love with the beautiful and seductive Tracy DiVincenzo, played by Diana Rigg. She's one of the highlights of this movie. But first, Bond must stop the evil genius Blofeld, played by Telly Savalas, from realizing a germ warfare plot that could kill millions. Now, On Her Majesty's Secret Service is also not a favourite of mine. I think it is a better film than Thunderball, so I give this one 2.5 out of 5. It's more watchable in that regard. And I do like Telly Savalas and Diana Rigg because they're very good actors, and Telly Savalas is just fine as Blofeld. He isn't as, I would say, weird and creepy as Donald Pleasance, but he is very charismatic and commanding as Blofeld. A very different take, and I liked that. And Diana Rigg is very classy, very witty and likable as Tracy, Bond's love interest in this. And of course, this is the Bond film where Bond gets married. And George Lazenby, though, that he's the weak point of this film. And honestly, there's some tonal problems with this and some weird parts where he's got this harem of women and all this stuff. It's just silly, to be honest. But Lazenby is a real weak point here. And I don't even like the visual style of this movie. It's kind of messy and over-edited. It's trying to be stylish, but it really just comes off as messy for me, and I don't really like it. But there are some good sequences in it. The finale action set piece is really good. Lazenby, to his credit, does good in the action sequences. He's very good in the physicality, and him and Diana Rigg have some chemistry, which gets better as the movie progresses. But outside of the action sequences and some romantic scenes, Lazenby isn't very good. He doesn't walk with any confidence or grace. He fills the suit decently, but he doesn't pull it off. He's very wooden. He doesn't have any grace or charisma. There's something missing. There's no intrigue to him. He's tough. He has some decent scenes with Diana Rigg, but that's about it. To play Bond, you need a lot of charisma and screen presence, and Lazenby to me just doesn't have that. He looks more like Mr. Bean to me if he had been to the gym. That's the only difference. I mean, sorry, but Lazenby to me just doesn't look like James Bond. I don't buy it. So It's not a great film to me. It could have been great. If Connery was in this, I think it would have been a better film. And if they had worked out, some of the sillier moments that just feel like a tonal clash, like the harem of women that he has in that I forgot what it was. I think it's like a ski lodge or something. The main villain's headquarters, basically, where he's undercover. But there is still some good elements to it. Like I said, locations are nice. Diana Rigg and Telly Savalas are really good in it. The music is excellent. One of John Barry's best scores. It's only marginally better than Thunderball, in my opinion. At least it's not boring. I'll say that. This movie at least is more intriguing than that one. So I'll give it 2.5 out of 5. But Lazenby, he just wasn't an actor, and I can only judge him on his one performance. The movie is watchable. I do recommend people watch this one, just for curiosity's sake. So after On Her Majesty's Secret Service, George Lazenby chose not to come back as Bond, even though he was offered, I think, like a 7-picture contract from the producers. But his agent advised him not to do it because they were like, oh, George, spy movies are a fad. They're not going to be... they're not going to be a thing anymore. It's the hippie period. People are more interested in movies like Easy Rider. The spy genre is a thing from the 60s. It's not coming back. How wrong that agent was. And, poor George Lazenby, who might have grown into the role. Who knows? Even though I don't think he looked right for the role, he still might have grown into the role. And at least the movies around him would have been interesting. But that's not what happened. Instead, what we got was Sean Connery returning as Bond in 1971's Diamonds Are Forever. Great. Connery is back. We have a great actor playing Bond. The original Bond is back. Sadly, he came back for a paycheck. And the script to this movie and the production quality just wasn't there. Because this, for my money, is without question one of the worst Bond films ever made, and definitely Connery's worst, without question. Even worse than Thunderball, and even worse than Never Say Never Again. I am not kidding. I can't stand Diamonds Are Forever. This movie is one big mountain of f***ing shit. It is terrible. It is an absolute mess of a movie. I'm going to go into a rant on this movie. It infuriates me. How could it be so bad? I mean, I'm blowing a fuse right now. I'm really blowing a fuse. I really don't rant much about movies anymore, but this one makes my blood boil. I'm going to read the story here. A fortune in stolen diamonds thrusts James Bond into action in this thrilling adventure. Yeah, right. Sean Connery returns as 007, teams up with a beautiful Tiffany case to prevent his nemesis Blofeld from using the diamonds in a deadly laser satellite. Fire the laser! This is, I think, a parody. This feels like a parody, and it's such a tonal shift. It doesn't make any sense considering the tragedy of how On Her Majesty's Secret Service ends. I mean, you only live twice. Even though it was fantastical, it wasn't absurdly tacky or cheesy or just goofy. This movie's going into full-on goofy territory. It's really silly. Even the music is comical. The opening scene shows Bond basically beating the crap out of all these people who are connected to Blofeld, right? He's pissed off, and it's like they're trying to wrap up the revenge part because, for those who don't know, spoiler alert right now, Bond gets married on Her Majesty's Secret Service, and Blofeld and one of his hench women, Irma Brunt, I believe the character's name was, kills Bond's wife after the wedding day. Just on their wedding day, I should say. And he's out there in his car holding his dead wife. So to me, this opening scene tries to just wrap that up very quickly. And it does it in such a tacky and very just not emotionally connected kind of way. I mean, that ending is tragic in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. It truly does stay with you. I will give On Her Majesty's Secret Service that. This one, on the other hand, just goes in a completely opposite direction. It's like, let's just clear that story and pretend it didn't happen and just tell our story right after. And when he finds Blofeld, when Connery finds Blofeld in the beginning of this movie, or who we think is Blofeld, because it turns out that Blofeld is cloning himself, making doubles, body doubles and stuff. So he kills one of Blofeld's body doubles in the opening scene in such a cheesy and silly way. One of his henchmen goes to disarm Bond, and Bond has like a mousetrap in his jacket. And then he shoves Blofeld into this mud pit, and with a shit-eating grin on his face, he goes, "Welcome to hell, Blofeld." What the f***? I'm laughing because I just can't believe how bad this movie is. I recommend watching it only once, just to see it to believe it. This is truly awful. Welcome to hell, Blofeld. Welcome to hell indeed. This movie is hell. And the following stuff in this movie, the performances are very obnoxious. Jill St. John, who plays Tiffany Case, just plays this very obnoxious character. She is so... In the beginning, she seems like she's going to be this tough chick, this tough American girl. But really, she just becomes a bubble-headed, annoying character and totally incapable. She is nowhere near where Pussy Galore was in the movie before, or even Aki from You Only Live Twice. Hell, not even Diana Rigg. Diana Rigg was excellent. How did we go from kind of a progression, really, with the female characters to such a regression here? This was just truly awful. And the action scenes are terrible. The finale is so boring and kind of messy and unexciting. I mean, what happens? Bond the final action scene is on an oil tanker or something in the middle of the ocean. And it's not very exciting. I didn't really think... This movie just didn't live up to anything. The only thing I like about this movie is the theme song by Shirley Bassey once again. And it's a great song. I love the song. And we do have two assassins, two gay assassins, in fact, Wint and Kidd. They're very memorable in this. Even though the finale with them being killed off is ridiculous. You know, it's just very cheesy and silly. But this movie overall is a mess. The production is trashy. There's some really bad optical and visual effects in this movie that look like they were from the early 50s, really. It's like War of the Worlds stuff. It's really, really bad considering this was made in 1971. And in a way, this was a Roger Moore Bond film before Roger Moore took over. You know, it was like, this is on the level of something like Moonraker, Man with the Golden Gun, that kind of bad level. It's really, really bad. And you know, even A View to a Kill is better than this. And A View to a Kill is not a very good Bond film, but it has its moments at least. But we'll get to that saga later. But Diamonds Are Forever, terrible production, terrible script, terrible tone, really tacky, and it's just not very well done. And the special and visual effects are terrible. Connery in this is awful, I must say. Connery is truly bad in this. It's like he's walking in his sleep. He kind of just waltzes through the production with a shit-eating grin on his face. He looks like he just got back from a 6-month vacation. He's put on a lot of weight. He clearly didn't give a shit. And he's only there for the paycheck. It shows. This is a terrible, terrible Bond film. I do not like it. Can you get a laugh out of this? Sure you can. I actually did laugh at this movie. Not with it, though. There's a difference between laughing with a movie and laughing at the movie. This is where you laugh at the movie because of how piss poor it is. It's badly made, badly acted, poorly written, a lot of terrible choices with the story and characters, and just unfulfilling. This is a very unsatisfying and just kind of boring movie. I mean, Bond rides in a space buggy, for Christ's sake. in this movie. And he puts Blofeld into a pit of mud, spouting some really cheesy lines that aren't even clever. And yeah, the Bond girl is terrible and obnoxious. And Blofeld, played by Charles Gray this time, what an awful choice. This guy just is obnoxious as well. Like, he's a far cry from Telly Savalas and a far cry from Donald Pleasance. You know, even Christoph Waltz, who I thought was a good choice on paper, even his performance was better than Charles Gray in this movie. I mean, we'll get to Christoph Waltz later. I love him as an actor, but I think his portrayal as Blofeld was a mess. But Charles Gray was just a bad portrayal and a bad performance. At least the performance from Waltz was good. But yeah, 0 stars. I can't stand Diamonds Are Forever. It is truly a painful movie to sit through. It's one watch just to see it and believe it. And that's it. Only if you're curious. I really, really hate this movie. I don't revisit it much at all. If ever, for that matter. Okay, so now, after that rant with Diamonds Are Forever, let's move on to the next era of James Bond, because after Diamonds Are Forever, Sean Connery chose not to come back as Bond. He fulfilled his one film deal where he got paid over $1 million, I believe, and I think he got a film deal where he could make whatever the hell he wanted to, or something like that. But comment below if you know the full details on that. Please correct me. I'm totally fine with corrections. I'm going unscripted here from the top of my head, so I may ramble on. So the next Bond was a TV star, Roger Moore, who was on the show The Saint, which he played sort of a James Bond-esque character. And Roger Moore is a very classy looking guy. I could see why they picked him. Now, do I think he was convincing as a tough, brutish secret agent? No. But I do think he's a very classy, suave, and very funny, very charming Bond. So he played it differently. And if you measure Roger Moore on that level, putting his own stamp on making Bond more humorous, more charming, more likable in some ways, then you're going to like his portrayal as Bond. It isn't perfect though, but Roger Moore's Bond has been criticized for being too cheesy and sleazy, quite frankly. His first Bond film is Live and Let Die, and it came out in 1973. Now, Live and Let Die was the first Roger Moore Bond film I saw. It was my dad's favorite Bond film, for a long time, until he saw Casino Royale. He loves Casino Royale, the Daniel Craig one, of course, I'm talking about. But Live and Let Die is his favorite, his personal favorite. This was, I think, his first Bond film. And it's not a bad debut. Not a bad debut from Roger Moore. In this, though, we don't really get to see... It's similar to Sean Connery. In this, he's still playing Bond, somewhat stern and serious, even in Man with a Golden Gun. But you do see a little bit of more style and charm, I guess, and a bit of warmth with Roger that you didn't see with Connery. And his appearance, he looks very different. Roger Moore had more of a gentlemanly quality, very polished and, very refined. But I do enjoy this one. It's not perfect, it's got some rough edges, but I still enjoy it. So the story goes, James Bond battles the forces of black magic in this high-octane adventure that hurdles him from the streets of New York to Louisiana's Bayou Country. With charm, wit, and deadly assurance, Roger Moore steps into Agent 007 and takes on a powerful drug lord, Yaphet Kotto, Mr. Big, with a diabolical scheme to conquer the world. Mr. Big is, of course, Dr. Kananga, Yaphet Kotto, one of the best Bond villains, in fact. And I love Yaphet Kotto as an actor. May he rest in peace. He's played some very memorable and likable characters. And this, of course, is one of probably his most famous, playing Dr. Kananga, a very charismatic villain in his own right, And I like this movie. I think it's really good. It is definitely a significantly better movie than Diamonds Are Forever. I think it's better than On Her Majesty's Secret Service, better than Thunderball. but it also has some problems with it. And a lot of it might have to do, again, with the socio-political norms of the time. There's just some things about it that do not hold up. But also, the Bond girl that Jane Seymour plays is a mixed bag. Some good qualities about her, some that are just very dated. She's no Diana Rigg, of course, but she is better than the Bond girl in Diamonds Are Forever, and I'll give it that, and maybe even better than Ursula Andress in terms of the character. A lot more interesting, at least. But Live and Let Die is a pretty solid entry. I enjoy it. The action scenes are decent. I like the setting. Yaphet Kotto and his entourage of villains is very memorable. It has a lot of that blaxploitation kind of quality. The style of movies like Shaft and so forth, and Cleopatra Jones. So it has a lot of that attitude. There's a lot of fun to be had with this one. There's a great boat chase, a good finale, and some good locations. And overall, it's a decent enough story, and there's a lot of humor in this, really. From one of my favorite characters is Tee-Hee, one of Kananga's henchmen, the guy in the red jacket and the hook for a hand. He's just, I don't know, he's just got this odd charm. Every time he shows up on screen, he's just this very towering, smiling guy, and he just kind of makes fun of Bond in very sly and cheeky ways. There's something really memorable about him in that. And Kananga has a lot of charisma too. And there's, of course, Baron Samedi, who has a very eerie and unnerving presence and an evil laugh that you can't help but just remember. It's going to echo in your mind. So, yeah, I mean, the story is there. It does its job. But ultimately, Roger Moore does a decent job. I don't think he's really come into his own yet. He will get to that in his third film. It always seems to be Bond number 3, where the actor playing him gets into the groove and puts their stamp on it. But Roger Moore does a decent job. Significantly better than George Lazenby, and significantly better in performance than Sean Connery was in Diamonds Are Forever in the film before. So 3.5 out of 5. I really, really enjoy Live and Let Die. A decent start, and definitely brought some confidence back into the series, I think. It's a different take, sure, but it still more or less is somewhere in that middle ground. Not too silly, not too intense. It's just right in the middle. And Roger still hasn't really gone there yet with that development of the humor and more of the suaveness and the charm. We are seeing hints of it, but he's still kind of playing it somewhat straight at times. Very stern in a way. Not brutish, but stern and serious. Very straight-faced, so to speak. But still a solid entry. Not bad. And the song by Paul McCartney and Wings, Live and Let Die, is classic. Solid movie. It was profitable, and I think it reinvigorated the series. But there was still this sense of Roger, warming up. So the next film, The Man with a Golden Gun, Roger Moore's second film, was released a year later in 1974. Oh boy. This was a misfire. Another misfire. It's not quite as bad as Diamonds Are Forever, but it's close. The only saving grace of this movie, really, is Christopher Lee as Scaramanga, the man with a golden gun. And, he is the highlight of this movie. Other than that, though, the Bond girls are lame. The action scenes are not very memorable, aside from that corkscrew stunt, which is ruined by a slide whistle sound effect. A lot of goofy shit in this. And, I gave Diamonds Are Forever 0 stars. This one, I give a 1.5 stars, perhaps. That's being generous. I want to give it just 1 star, but because we got Christopher Lee in there, I'll give it a little bit more. But this isn't a very good entry, and considering how, confident Live and Let Die was, Roger's first film, this was a step down. Really a step down. The action isn't very good. There's a lot of cheese in this. There's some kung fu scenes that aren't very well done. Nick Nack, the villain, is a memorable screen presence, but he's treated like a goofball. Really silly. And yeah, but I'm just going to read the story here. James Bond has been marked for death, and he'll need all the lethal instincts and seductive charm to survive this adventure. Roger Moore returns as 007 and faces off a deadly game of cat and mouse with the assassin Francisco Scaramanga, featuring a wild car chase through Bangkok and Bond's stunning confrontation with the entire martial arts school. The man with a golden gun delivers, pull out all the stops, excitement. Nope, sorry, I don't think so. That martial arts school sequence is silly and not very well executed. It's trying to be Enter the Dragon. It's not even close. Christopher Lee is the highlight. The idea of a secret agent up against an assassin, you know, another professional, is really exciting. And I think Scaramanga is very good. And Christopher Lee is very good as Scaramanga. But honestly, after you watch this movie, you don't remember a single thing about it outside of Christopher Lee. Roger Moore in this is a bit of a jerk in his performance. His portrayal of Bond in this is just a jerk. You don't really like him. He does some things that I'm just like, really? Like there's a kid in a boat that he just pushes over. And I'm like, really, dude? Like, come on. And he's just a jerk. He almost breaks this girl's arm. He's trying to be like Sean Connery almost in those earlier films, because Connery would smack around the women in the first couple of Bond films he did. It's just out of character. It just doesn't work for the Bond that he's playing at all. So this isn't a very good Bond film. I don't like it, and it wasn't very well received financially. So yeah, Man with a Golden Gun, 1.5 stars out of 5. It's not very good. However, all hope was not lost, because in 1977 we got The Spy Who Loved Me. This is Roger Moore's magnum opus. So Roger Moore came into his own. Here, this is Roger Moore's Goldfinger. It has the gadgets, the locations, the Bond girls, the Bond villain. Well, actually, the villain is kind of standard, but the henchman, Jaws, really steals the show. I mean, Stromberg is a decent enough Bond villain. I think they wanted Blofeld at one point, but I think they might have changed their mind. I don't know if there was a legal issue about it or it was something else, but that's from what I recall hearing at some point. Correct me if I'm wrong, once again. But I'm going to read the backstory here. Nobody does it better than Bond, and he proves it once more in this explosively entertaining adventure that takes him from Egyptian pyramids to the ocean floor to a gravity-defying mountaintop ski chase. Roger Moore brings his inimitable style to 007 as he teams up with the beautiful Russian agent Anya Amasova to stop the megalomaniac Stromberg from unleashing a horrific scheme for world domination. Like I said, this is Roger Moore's Goldfinger. It has great locations. I like Barbara Bach's Russian secret agent. She's like basically Bond's cooperative in this, and she's really good. She is really good. Granted, she still has to be saved at the end, but everything up to that point, she's a very capable agent, you know, but when it comes down to it at the end, she still has to be rescued by him. But I think Bond and her have some very good chemistry. Roger has really come into his own. He's dropped the brutish and sternness that was left over from the Connery and Lazenby era, and here he's more of like a guy who tries to avoid getting into a fight and only fights if he has to. But you can see that Roger just isn't a fighter, right? He's more of like a dodger. He tries to find ways for the villains to defeat themselves, if that makes sense. That's the way I see it. But he's very suave, he's very stylish, he's very charming, and the humor is right on the mark in this one. The humor is, I wouldn't say it's cheesy, but it's cheeky. It has to be cheeky. And it really worked here. I really enjoyed Roger's performance in this. And overall, it just has a big adventure feel. The big underwater lair is fantastic. It's another great fantasy escapist Bond film. And Jaws, of course, played by Richard Kiel, the villain with the metal teeth, iconic, and he's very scary, in fact. There's a sequence on a train where Bond has to fight him. That scene gave me nightmares as a kid when I watched The Spy Who Loved Me. Jaws freaked me out in this first one. Sadly, they made him into an idiot in the next film, but we'll get to that. But solid 5 out of 5. This is Roger's magnum opus from the Bond series. It was a big success, and they spent more time on this one because Man with the Golden Gun came out in 74, and this one came out in 77. So, really good film. I really enjoyed it. So after The Spy Who Loved Me, a follow-up was greenlit, and only 2 years later, we got the most expensive Bond film to that point, which was Moonraker in 1979. Moonraker is usually one of those Bond films that's pointed to for being the one that jumped the shark for the very first time. I disagree. I think it definitely jumps the shark again, but it wasn't the first one to jump the shark. Some people say it was You Only Live Twice, and I wouldn't go that far. You Only Live Twice definitely has fantastical elements, but it's not full-on fantasy. Diamonds Are Forever, to me, was where it was starting to delve into the fantastical. The diamond satellite laser, the goofy humor that just doesn't hit, and bad performances. This is another one of those films. It's not quite as bad as Diamonds Are Forever, or even The Man with a Golden Gun for that matter, but it's definitely a massive step down from The Spy Who Loved Me, and definitely a step down from Live and Let Die. It's not even as good as On Her Majesty's Secret Service, if you ask me, and that's saying a lot because I'm not a big fan of Majesty's. But I gave that one 2.5 out of 5. This one I give 2, slightly less. Now, why is that? Well, this movie's just too damn silly. It's all about special effects. The story I don't give a shit about. It's basically trying to be Star Wars-esque in some ways. You know, Star Wars definitely had an impact on this movie, as did a lot of other films, really, because the Bond movies capture the zeitgeist of the time. But even so, this is not something that really worked well here. I don't really think this worked well. So here's the story set up. James Bond blasts into orbit in this pulse-pounding adventure that takes him from Venice to Rio de Janeiro and into outer space. Yes, Bond in space. Roger Moore stars for the 4th time as Agent 007 and joins forces with NASA scientist Holly Goodhead, Lois Chiles, yeah, not very subtle on that name, to prevent a power-mad industrialist, Hugo Drax, from destroying all human life on Earth. There you go. That's the plot. Big space station, another bigger-than-life villain. Really, this is where it was starting to get, again, going back to silly again, like in Diamonds Are Forever. Space lasers, space station. This time, actually, Bond goes into space. They got laser guns. The Bond girls aren't very good in this. They're very forgettable. Jaws, who was once a threatening and scary villain, even though he was fantastical, he was scary. In this, is turned into an idiot. He's turned into Bambi, into this bumbling, goofy, Frankenstein-esque cartoon character. He just kind of gets shat on through the whole movie. He's not really any threat at all in this movie. And Roger is still okay in this. I think his performance is fine. It's just a very adequate performance as Bond, I would say. Not his worst, but adequate, I would say. But honestly, this movie just tonally is a mess, and it's the wrong direction. It's not a boring movie, I'll say that. This is watchable, and it doesn't hurt to watch it. This movie doesn't feel like it's pulling teeth, but it definitely leaves you going, why? Like, why did they go in this direction? It leaves you scratching your head more than anything. And yeah, it was just a weird one. There are fans of this movie, and I can see why. I actually used to like this one growing up. I used to like it okay. But when you watch it again, especially, you know, getting older, it's like, yeah, you can see the problems with this. And the humor isn't very good either. It's not on the level of what it was on The Spy Who Loved Me. So yeah, 2 stars out of 5. Admittedly, it's a bit more entertaining than Thunderball, I'll say that. But this has gone too far into science fiction for my tastes. After Moonraker, the Bond producers knew they had gone too far, and there was criticism. So what did they do? Well, they stripped it back and went back to basics. For Your Eyes Only came out in 1981 and is a complete U-turn away from what Moonraker was. This goes back to a more grounded, more espionage Bond film, similar to, Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, more in that territory. More Russia with Love, I would say, and On Her Majesty's Secret Service, but with a lot more polish and a lot more focus. This movie is really good. I really enjoy For Your Eyes Only. At first, I didn't like it that much. I thought it was a bit slow, but that was when I was much younger. But when I watched it again recently, I realized this is actually a really good Bond film. Has a great Bond girl, great action set pieces, especially that ski chase, and a very underrated musical score. I mean, this musical score was done by Bill Conti this time, not John Barry. Bill Conti done the music for the Rocky films, of course. And in this, he provides sort of a disco-style James Bond score, and I actually like it. It's really funky and cool, and quirky. And it works. Somehow it works in this movie. I think so anyway. I really love it. And especially in that opening scene with Bond getting revenge on Blofeld. Yes, Blofeld returns for the opening scene. And I got to admit, I kind of laughed a little bit. It was funny. But, I enjoyed it. It's maybe a bit silly, but for some reason I kind of liked it. It was a better ending to Blofeld, in my opinion, than what we got in Diamonds Are Forever. Because that was just like, what the hell happened there? At least with this one, there was some closure. But anyways, let's get to the story. James Bond is thrust into one of his most riveting adventures, in this jam-packed, free-for-all outrageous stunts, passionate encounters, and exciting confrontations. Roger Moore portrays 007 with lethal determination in a plot that finds him infiltrating the Greek underworld and racing against time to find a stolen device capable of controlling a fleet of nuclear submarines. And the villain is a guy named Christatos. This is the only flaw from this movie. The villain. Christatos is a very boring, bland, and forgettable villain. Some say he might be realistic because he's quiet. I'm like, yeah, but this is James Bond. The villain has to have some charisma. Even the most serious Bond villain, who was Franz Sanchez in License to Kill, that would come later on, had a lot of charisma and even some humor. Christatos does not. This is a more stripped back and more serious Bond film. There's still some of the Roger Moore-isms in there, a bit of the goofy humor, which I think works in this one because it's not overboard like it was in the last entry or in Man with a Golden Gun or something like that, or even Diamonds Are Forever. It's not on that level. So I really enjoyed For Your Eyes Only. I really like it. I like the action scenes. I like the music. The Bond girl is really good. And, she's armed with a crossbow, wants revenge for the death of her parents who have a connection to the villain. Bond and her have a really good chemistry. And I really liked it. And it's more of a mystery and intrigue story again. It's more of a classic espionage Bond film. And I really, really enjoyed it. And the song For Your Eyes Only by Sheena Easton, I also really like. It's really nice. It's the best since Nobody Does It Better from Spy Who Loved Me. The song Moonraker previously was okay as well. I believe Shirley Bassey did that one as well, and that was her last one. But I think this is better than the song Moonraker. And that's saying a lot. But I really like the romantic and very lush sound of the song For Your Eyes Only. It's really good. And the movie's very good. It's well shot, great stunts, great action. It's a bit more grounded, even though it still has its humorous moments. The only issue I have is the villain not being very memorable. And there's a character, a young girl character. She's like, I think, 19 or 20, who's got a crush on Bond, and she's kind of annoying, and it's a bit creepy, but at least Roger plays off it well. He basically goes, get away from me, you know. He's tasked with a responsibility to look after this girl, but she has a crush on him, and he's just trying to separate that. He's like, oh, keep your distance, honey, I'm too old for you, that kind of thing. And he plays that well. So he tries to play a protector, like a guardian character to her, and I appreciated that they tried that here. So, For Your Eyes Only, interesting, well done. I appreciate this one a lot. 4 out of 5, a solid Roger Moore Bond film. I like it. Now, fast forward to the next film that Roger Moore made, 1983's Octopussy. And not only did this movie come out in 1983, but guess who else re-emerged? That's right, Sean Connery came back to play Bond one more time in Never Say Never Again. Now, how Never Say Never Again got to exist is a very complicated and long story involving Thunderball. It goes way back to Thunderball, where, let's just say, an Ian Fleming used some ideas that weren't entirely his. Not just ideas, but plot elements and even the title. And because it was a co-write, he didn't credit, you know, for the novel version of Thunderball. So the deal was that co-writer, or the co-creator was Kevin McClory, got to make his own version of that story. And that's how Never Say Never Again came into existence. And he got Sean Connery, who honestly I don't think was very happy with the producers of how they treated him when he played Bond back in the day. Now, Connery was like in his 50s by this point, early 50s, and Roger in Octopussy was the same age roughly. But Never Say Never Again, I think, is a lot more entertaining as a Bond film than Thunderball. I think it's a lot tighter. It's not as well produced, I think. In fact, it's not much better produced. But Connery is in better form here, I think, despite his age. And he's a lot more confident and charismatic. He seems to be having fun with it. Whereas in Thunderball, you know, he was better in Thunderball, I'll say, his performance. But he was better here than he was in Diamonds Are Forever. So I'll say this is definitely better than Diamonds Are Forever. And it's about as good as Thunderball. At least it doesn't have that terrible chase scene with the boat at the end, which has some terrible reprojection. And I do think Max Largo is a better villain than Amelia Largo in this one. So I give this one 2.5 out of 5. I enjoy it. It doesn't have the Bond music or the gun barrel sequence that we all know and love, because it is an unofficial Bond film. But it's still an interesting watch. I recommend this one over Diamonds Are Forever, at least. Now, let's get on to the official Bond film of '83. It was competing with Never Say Never Again, and both movies effectively did very well. But Octopussy won by, I think, about $20 million. I think Never Say Never Again made $160 million, and this one made $180+ million. So both were successful. But this one was slightly more successful because it was seen as an official Bond film. It did miss that quality. Everybody who knew the gun barrel, the music, and the production design, which was much better on these official films, could tell the difference, even with Connery on board in Never Say Never Again. But Octopussy, this is another escapist, borderline fantasy Bond. It's interesting because the story is more or less a classic Bond story, with some of that fantastical element. I think this one is it's not as bad as Man with a Golden Gun or Moonraker, but it's not as good as Spy Who Loved Me, Live and Let Die, or For Your Eyes Only. But it's an entertaining watch. I think if Roger had finished his run on this film, he would have ended on a better note. But anyways, I'm going to read the story here. From a thrilling jet chase to a climactic countdown to a nuclear disaster, James Bond is back in an electrifying adventure that pushes the limit for non-stop excitement. Roger Moore portrays the immortal action hero, perfectly capturing 007's deadly expertise, wit, and overpowering sex appeal as he investigates the murder of a fellow agent who was clutching a priceless Fabergé egg at the time of his death. And yeah, this is a really, really fun Bond film. It has some silly moments like Bond swinging like Tarzan, and there's things like that. And the character Octopussy, played by Maud Adams, who I really like. The character is interesting, but she does have like this entourage of women that are kind of like circus performers, and it's kind of like, really? Like it's a bit outlandish. But granted, this is a more fantastical film, and I guess it works. But I do like the action set pieces. They're very fun and exciting. The music in this isn't quite as good as the previous film. I think the theme song by Rita Coolidge, I believe, as it says here, All Time High, is just a meh song. It's not awful, but it's not very great. But I do like Louis Jordan as the villain, Kamal. He's really good. And also Steven Berkov is a lot of fun as the Soviet villain, General Orlov. He is very over the top, but very charming. He does a good job. Steven Berkov is fantastic. He was great in Rambo 2. He's great in Beverly Hills Cop. And he's great here. And of course in Clockwork Orange for a little bit part. But he was great here. He's having a lot of fun with it. And Roger is also very good here, I think. He's better here than he was in Moonraker, I would say. And definitely better than Man with a Golden Gun and Live and Let Die. Live and Let Die, he was just figuring it out. But he was still okay. But Octopussy is a fun one. If you don't take it too seriously, this one is a perfect 50-50 mix of cheesy fun and some genuine intrigue. I think the story is engaging enough, and if the villains weren't so entertaining, this movie would fall flat on its face. And I like the twin assassins, the knife throwers. This is a fun one. This is a solid 3 out of 5. Not bad, not perfect. Has some maybe 2 silly moments that I wish they just trimmed, but other than that, still very entertaining. I do recommend this one. And that leaves us with one more final Roger Moore Bond film, and this one is a mixed bag. Roger Moore's final Bond film was maybe one Bond film too many. This one has some good ideas. A View to a Kill from 1985. So we're in the mid-80s now, and we could see the transition from the old to the new in a way. The new era of technology and stuff, and new, corporate type villains, with Max Zorin, played by Christopher Walken, for example. And we got Grace Jones there as the henchwoman. Very striking. In fact, these two are the highlight of the movie. And the music by John Barry, and of course the theme song by Duran Duran. It's very memorable. However, the movie, I think, has some problems. And first of all, we have to address Roger Moore here. While Roger still does his job adequately, you can see that he's just getting too old by this point. Physically, he's just not able to be convincing in the fight and action sequences. He had a lot of stunt doubles, obviously. But, and they're very obvious in this one. And it's just, the first half is very slow. It does pick up in the second half, but half the time, Roger, it feels like you're watching the retirement village take on these younger, high-tech bad guys. That's what it feels like when you watch this, especially that first half at the horse race sequences, where the horse auctions happen. That's where Bond goes undercover as St. John Smythe. Anyways, the story, I'm just going to read the back here. Roger returns with elegance and lethal charm in his final performance as James Bond in A View to a Kill. Bond confronts Max Zorin, Christopher Walken, who has devised a plan to corner the world's microchip market, even if he has to kill millions to do it. But before Bond can stop the madman, he must confront Zorin's beautiful and deadly companion, Mayday, played by Grace Jones. The highlights, like I said, Max Zorin, Christopher Walken, and Grace Jones, who's Mayday, and the music by John Barry and Duran Duran, solid. The microchip story is interesting. It's very modern for the time, very polished. But it's basically the Goldfinger plot kind of recycled for the 80s. But the problem I have is it's the old meets the new here, but in the wrong way. Roger's just not convincing. I mean, Christopher Walken's like in his 30s here. Roger's nearly 60, and he's struggling, to keep up in the action sequences. And he's sleeping with he sleeps, I think, with like 4 women in this film who are like less than half his age. Even Roger at the time, from what I heard, was talking about it, saying, I was old enough to be their grandfather or something like that. Yeah, it gets a bit like that. And he looks older. He looks strange. I think Roger had plastic surgery as well at this time. And the humor here is terrible. The humor is awful. And yeah, Roger gives off the creepy old man vibes in this one a little too much. But again, there are some decent sequences. The finale on the Golden Gate Bridge is good, but this is just a very tired film. When the new stuff comes, it's cool, but the old stuff needed to be changed. I mean, Roger should not have done this one. I think Timothy Dalton should have done this one, and they should have removed perhaps some of the scenes at the horse auctions and just tightened this movie up a little bit and made it more of an espionage film. And I think it would have been a better film. But as it stands, this one, I gotta be honest, I want to give this one 3 stars, but it's really a 2.5-star film. But it is watchable. I do think it's better than people say it is. It's not as bad, but it's still not very good. This wasn't a very good way to end Roger's tenure. He should have stopped at Octopussy. It's not as bad as Man with a Golden Gun. It's not as bad as Moonraker. It's not as bad as Diamonds Are Forever. But it's about as good as, Majesty's Secret Service, I guess. 2.5 stars is what I gave that one. It's perfectly watchable. It's fine. But I do think the villains and the music are the highlight, and an occasional decent stunt sequence with the Golden Gate Bridge, for example, and the chase through Paris. That was pretty good. But there's a lot of cheesy stuff, and Roger being too old and sleeping with girls who are like in their early 20s. It's just a bit much. And I didn't care for the Bond girl. Played, I think the Bond girl's name was Stacey Sutton. She just is another damsel in distress. And she just screams a lot. She's just really obnoxious. So yeah, this isn't the best from Roger, but it's also not his worst. It's just a very uneven and middle of the road kind of movie. It's not a good one to end a career on. Not awful, but not a good one to end a career on. It's just very tired. So after A View to a Kill, Roger Moore wrapped up his tenure as James Bond. He was close to 60, and he even joked about his age in interviews. And they were on the search for another James Bond, and that choice was originally Pierce Brosnan. And Pierce Brosnan was effectively going to be James Bond for what would be 1987's The Living Daylights. But that's not Pierce Brosnan on the cover there. That's Timothy Dalton. What happened? Well, the short version goes like this. Pierce Brosnan was originally going to be Bond for The Living Daylights. He was on a TV show at the time called Remington Steele, where he played a James Bond-esque character, and people really loved this show, and they loved him as this character. And they said, why doesn't this guy play Bond? He's handsome, he's got the charm, the humor, he could do it. And yeah, he definitely seemed to be the right guy for the job, but it didn't happen. Why? Well, his contract for the TV show was renewed at the last minute. He was supposed to be Bond. They said the show wasn't going to continue, but at the last minute, there was a clause in the contract that gave the studio time to think about whether they were going to renew it or not. But they were saying, at least on the word of mouth, that it wasn't going to happen. Until the last minute, they decided, yeah, let's renew it. I mean, this guy's going to play James Bond. This is getting more buzz. We're going to get new ratings again. At least that's what their thinking was at the time, from what I heard. Anyway, allegedly. So Brosnan couldn't get in, and at the last minute they got Dalton. And Dalton had been asked in the past to play James Bond before, and that was during the time Sean Connery was going to finish. And this was the first time when he finished on You Only Live Twice. So they wanted Timothy Dalton for On Her Majesty's Secret Service in 1969, but Dalton, at the time, said he was too young. He thought following on from Sean Connery is crazy. You know, at the time it was believed to be crazy, and also he was only 24, 25. Bond should be in his mid-30s, a seasoned professional. So he said no, and they got George Lazenby, and we all know what happened from there. But now Dalton was in his early 40s. I believe he was 39, maybe 40 years old when he got this role, or he turned 40 as they were making it. I'm not exactly sure on the age, but it was about that age. A decent time to start. I mean, Roger Moore was 45, 46 when he got the role, but he looked younger than his age. So Dalton, they could probably get 3, 4 movies out of him, maybe 5 they were hoping, you know, because he looked quite youthful. And even though he was 40, he looked about 35 here. He was very, very well aged. And Dalton, this guy unfortunately got shafted by the audience and his contract. And we'll get to that in a bit. Let's just talk about this film generally first. It's a good film. I think it's a breath of fresh air after A View to a Kill. It isn't perfect, however. I think the highlights of this movie is the first 75 minutes, the action sequences. Timothy Dalton's really a highlight in this. 75% of the time he's really good. The other 25% not so much, but I'll get to that. But he's mostly good. Dalton's really good in this film. And the music's great by John Barry once again, and the theme song by Aha is pretty good. In fact, that's my favorite Aha song. And, you know, it's just a breath of fresh air after the excesses of Roger Moore. All the goofy humor had been stripped away, and, you know, it was much needed. But there's also some problems with this movie. The second half of the film is a bit convoluted. It starts from this KGB story of backstabbing, double crossing, defecting, going to this plot about arms smuggling, diamonds and opium in Afghanistan. It's just kind of convoluted how it transitions to that. And that's the problem I have with this movie. The screenplay in the second half is half-baked. The first half is really well done, but it seems like they didn't know what to do in the second half, which is unfortunate. But let's just talk about the plot here. Armed with the razor-sharp instincts and a license to kill, Bond battles diabolical arms merchants bent on world domination in this thrilling, lightning-paced adventure. Timothy Dalton brings energy, humor, and ruthless cunning to his debut performance as Agent 007. I don't know about the humor there, because the humor is the biggest thing Dalton was criticized for. Not having enough of it. No humor, no charm. Too intense, too serious, too cold. You know, some called him, you know, having no charisma. I disagree on that. He just has a different type of charisma. He has this cold, calculating, intelligent, and super professional appeal. I like this, you know, he's so sure of himself. He's like a surgeon. That's the way I could describe it when he's doing his job. He's very meticulous. And there is an attraction there. Like, the guy's just really smart. So he has the intelligence. He has, you know, the intensity. He has the physicality. And he has the looks. He's really a good-looking actor. You know, he's not a pretty boy either. This is what I like about Dalton's handsomeness, if you will. I mean, Pierce Brosnan would play Bond is a pretty boy. Let's face it, he is a pretty boy. And with Bond, you need to have an element of grit, I think. And not since Connery, I think, did we have that. And Dalton really captures that. He's handsome, but he's not a pretty boy. And there is this, he has one hell of an eye line. He has a set of eyes that show kindness and compassion in one sense, but then when it comes down to it, it turns like Dalton looks completely different. There's an intensity there that I can't quite describe. Only he has. Not even Connery has this. And I think that's why I really am drawn to Dalton's performance as Bond. He feels very real. I mean, Connery does a great job, but he still has that kind of laid-back style, that suaveness. Dalton, while being handsome, he doesn't. He's very different in some ways. I like it, but it's different. But it still has elements of James Bond that are signature. I mean, he drinks, he smokes, he sleeps, with women, of course. I mean, in this movie, though, he only sleeps with two women. The first woman in the beginning is just like one he just meets on a boat after he's survived a deadly mission, right? As like an introduction. It's a great introduction, by the way, when he's on the top of this Jeep going down the Rock of Gibraltar. It's crazy. But then the rest of the movie starts and he's paired up with this one woman who he kind of develops a relationship with. It's really sweet, in fact, and you get to see the sweet side of Bond, a sensitive side in a way. Not since On Her Majesty's Secret Service had we seen this. And in a sense, we kind of saw it with For Your Eyes Only, but really it wasn't since On Her Majesty's Secret Service did we see Bond showing a bit more of his caring and compassionate side with this girl who he's basically using and protecting because she holds some answers, or she might lead him to the bad guys in this. So that's a highlight from this, is that the relationship in this is a lot more interesting. The Bond girl isn't necessarily a tough girl. She's just this cello player who happens to have a boyfriend who's connected to the KGB, right? And is defecting, but he's got a lot of shady dealings with arms dealers. And she has been set up as part of this elaborate scheme he has to defect. But it was all a ruse to fool the British. And so she's caught up in the middle of this, and Bond's job is to use her to get to the villain, Koskov, and the arms dealer, who is Brad Whitaker, played by Joe Don Baker. Now, the biggest problem I have with the movie, though, is while the first 75 minutes is good, the story is interesting, it's intriguing, there's some good action set pieces, the music, all that stuff is good. Dalton is good, he looks good on screen, he's capable in the action scenes, he's intelligent, he's smart, he has a nice warmth to him when it comes through, and he's deadly and dangerous when he needs to be. But the second half of this movie gets a bit convoluted because everything leads up to this story about diamonds, opium, and arms. It doesn't really quite gel together. It all finishes in Afghanistan. One hell of a finale, but you're like, how did we get here? I mean, it's exciting. The action set pieces in Afghanistan are really well done, but a part of me wishes that that part of the screenplay was fixed and made more clear. I think they dumped on a little too much. I mean, it could have been just a bit more refined. If the screenplay had one more revision to fix the second half involving the smuggling with the diamonds, the heroin, the guns, it would have been all right. And another problem are the villains. The villains just aren't really that memorable. They're not bad. I think they're better than, let's say, Christatos in For Your Eyes Only. But still, they're not necessarily anything to write home about. They're not memorable. They're no Goldfinger. They're no Karl Stromberg. They're not even Rosa Klebb or Red Grant from Russia with Love. They're just kind of... they're functional. They're there. The performances are fine, but they don't really stick out much, especially Whitaker, the arms dealer. One thing I will say is the henchman of those villains is really good. Necros, who I believe was Carl's brother in Die Hard, the same actor. And Necros is memorable because he's this tall, athletic, blonde-haired henchman who's really sneaky and deadly. Like, he really infiltrates MI6 undercover in such a scary way, you know, and he's very effective. But he is a classic Bond henchman, and there's a pretty good fight with him and Bond at the end on the edge of that plane, on the CN-313, whatever that plane is called. But it's awesome. It's a great sequence, and it's just a satisfying Bond film. I don't think it broke enough ground. This movie is trapped between the old guard and the new guard. The new is Timothy Dalton. The old guard are the writers and the filmmakers. The producers and Dalton want to push in this new direction, but the writers and the filmmaking team are not quite sure how to go there. And the humor that Dalton has are basically Roger Moore's leftovers, and I don't think they suit his Bond. He's a more serious and grounded Bond, and there is warmth to him, sure. And, you know, the humor doesn't suit him. There's just some cheesy lines that don't fit well with his Bond. It's just tonally incorrect. It's something that Roger Moore would have said, not what Timothy Dalton would have said. And also, there is a lack of suaveness from Dalton. You don't see him like, you know, Sean, after a fight scene, for example, would fix his tie or fix his cufflinks, or even, and Brosnan would do this as well. Same with Roger Moore. What a helpful chap, you know, he would fix his tie. So that stuff was stripped. But other than that, I think Dalton was excellent. It's a good film. I think it's a solid 3 out of 5. It's really good. But if the screenplay had been revised one more time for the second half, if the villains had been more memorable, and had they worked on giving Dalton some humor that was more tailored to him, in a sense, a more morbid style of humor, which would happen in his next film, I think this would have been easily a 5-star Bond film. As it stands, it's a solid breath of fresh air with a Bond that I like, and I'm excited to see what he does next. So for a debut, it's a good breath of fresh air, but it wasn't fresh enough just yet. However, the movie was a hit, and the producers were quite confident that they could make another one with Dalton. Enter 1989's License to Kill. This one was controversial. License to Kill, to this day even, I mean, it's got a lot more appreciation now, but it's still considered the most controversial Bond film. And the reason is because it's far more intense, it's more serious. This goes into a much darker territory, but it makes sense. This came out the time of Lethal Weapon and Die Hard, so the Bond films had to measure up, and I think it did it adequately. Let's read the back panel here. James Bond turns renegade to hunt down a master criminal in this pulse-pounding thrill ride that's packed with stunts, subtle humor, and explosive confrontations. Timothy Dalton brings urgency, charm, and deadly determination to his portrayal of the super agent, who leaves the British Secret Service and begins a fierce vendetta after his friend Felix Leiter is brutally attacked by drug lord Franz Sanchez, played by Robert Davi. And Robert Davi is an excellent Bond villain, and he makes this movie. Him and Dalton have an incredible chemistry, which we have not seen, you know, in a Bond film to this point. It's really solid, and at the time didn't get much attention. But really a good movie. I loved this movie. As a kid, I wasn't a big fan of Dalton's films, but License to Kill did stick out with me. Even though I wasn't the biggest fan of it, I kind of liked it at the time, but I didn't know why. I guess it was the action sequences, and I could see how good the actors' performances were. I liked Timothy Dalton's determination. They were not kidding about that. Dalton is determined in this movie, because the whole thing about, you know, the whole thing is a really brutal revenge film. And it may sound generic, but it's very well done here. And Dalton's performance is so good, it's hard to ignore this. And it really makes it worthwhile. Also, the Bond girls in this are not only, you know, gorgeous, but they're capable. Well, at least one of them is. One of them is sort of a damsel in distress because she's the drug lord's girlfriend, Franz Sanchez's girlfriend, Lupe. She's beautiful, but she's trapped, you know, and she's amongst some seriously bad people, but she's trying to find ways to escape. And we deal with a love triangle here, the first of its kind, really. And it's pretty well done, I think. And the action scenes are great. The music by Michael Kamen is awesome. It has like the James Bond vibe with the Die Hard vibe, because it's very much like Joel Silver produced this in a way. It has that feel, but it's a lot more violent. This is still the most violent Bond film to date, and it's really successful, I think, for the most part. This is a solid 4 out of 5. Sadly, it didn't gross as much money as the last film. It wasn't a bomb, but it didn't gross that much in America. It made $156 million worldwide, but the last one made $191 million. So there was a drop. What happened? A lot of it had to do with the last minute marketing changes, because this was originally called License Revoked, but they changed it at the last minute, lost a lot of their marketing budget as a result, and the promotional material wasn't good as a result because it was last minute and it looked rushed and cheap. And there was a lot of competition in the summer of '89. You had Ghostbusters 2, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Lethal Weapon 2, Ghostbusters 2. It was just a packed summer, and this movie just kind of got buried a bit. But critically, interestingly enough, I mean, I remember seeing a review from Siskel and Ebert. The review was much surprisingly stronger than the last one. And even Gene Siskel appreciated Timothy Dalton. They both agree that Timothy Dalton had finally come into his own as James Bond. And that's truly the case here. This is where Dalton's Bond has been solidified. It didn't take 3 films, it took only 2. And they were starting to catch on. This is a solid 4 out of 5, and I only give it 4 because there's still some rough edges to this. And a lot of it has to do with some subplots, like the Stinger missile subplot was maybe one subplot too many. And there's some tonal problems here, like some sound effects that are pretty bad. Bond getting attacked by ninjas perhaps was a bit much. And yeah, it's a bit overdone in some ways. And the finale at the end, while amazing, that truck tanker chase is great, the resolution of the revenge plot doesn't quite resolve in a way that should. For a movie this intense, it ends on a kind of light note, and I'm thinking they should have just ended it with Bond getting on the truck with Pam, the Bond girl who helps him on this mission to take down Franz Sanchez. It should have just ended with them driving off into the sunset, Bond calling Felix saying, "I got the bastard," or something like that, and they could just drive off. And maybe Bond can meet Felix in the hospital and they can just all, you know, kind of shake hands or something. But no, it ends in a kind of typical happy James Bond kind of way, and that's why I only give this 4 stars. But it's a really good Bond film, and it's a shame Timothy Dalton didn't make more. We were supposed to get one more film with him at least in 1991-92. It was rumored to be called Property of a Lady, but I think, according to the writer of that original screenplay, it was supposed to be called GoldenEye or Colonel Sun. They were considering those 2 titles. But the rumored title was Property of a Lady, and I think, you know, that would have been a more appropriate title, considering the screenplay for that unmade Bond film does exist. It's the one written by Michael G. Wilson and Alphonse Ruggiero. It was posted on a Reddit forum, and it's a pretty good script. One more revision, it would have been perfect. It's a very high-tech kind of story, and it involves the Hong Kong handover during the transition from the British back to China. And it dealt with a Chinese industrialist who wanted to... It was very similar to what GoldenEye would become with Pierce Brosnan in some ways. It was very high-tech, dealing with that scene at the time in the early 90s. And it had some really wild stuff in it. And I think the villains were far more polished and interesting than the Living Daylights, but I think Franz Sanchez is really a great villain here. Yeah, he's a drug lord, that may seem very typical, but he's very charismatic, very charming, very evil as well, and Bond and him have this dynamic. It's like mirror opposites, and Bond doesn't really kill a whole lot of people compared to some of the other ones, but he sets up Sanchez really good in this. It's really about him taking his revenge by breaking down Sanchez's empire, making him paranoid and driving him crazy until the big explosive finale where he really fucks Sanchez up. It's one hell of a satisfying ending, and it's frustrating. I wish Timothy got to make that one more film, but why didn't it happen? Well, there were rumors that Dalton at the time was fired. He wasn't a great Bond. The audience wasn't quite receptive to him. But I disagree. I think the audience would have still gone to have seen his third film, because film number 3, it always happens in number 3, because even Roger Moore, you know, with Man with a Golden Gun didn't do very well, and there were still some people who were lukewarm with him. But Spy Who Loved Me comes up, the third one, third time's a charm, and takes off. I think if Dalton got to his third, and based upon the script I had read, it was a more balanced film, because this one admittedly is grimmer than the previous one, but the script for the unmade Dalton film is much closer in tone to GoldenEye, in effect. It has a very similar tone, more high-techy. Imagine the tone of GoldenEye with a more high-tech element. I think they could have implemented a bit more intensity, admittedly, because it still feels like they were going for a slightly lighter tone. I don't know if Dalton would have added some more intensity, but either way, Dalton in this film is excellent, and there is some humor in this that works, but it's a lot more morbid and sinister. I think his best moment is when Sanchez meets him for the first time, not knowing that who Bond is and why he's out to get him. And he asks Bond, "Why do you carry a gun? Why are you entering my casino with this gun?" He goes, "In my business, you prepare for the unexpected." And Sanchez is like, "What business is that?" Bond kind of smiles and he goes, "I help people with problems." "So you're a problem solver," Sanchez responds. And Dalton says this magical line, "I'm more of a problem eliminator." And he says it with quiet confidence, with a slight smile, but not on the nose. And they both start laughing. That is a great Dalton moment. That is the humor they needed to go with. And I think the line he says when Heller comes through the wall, one of Sanchez's henchmen, looks like he came to a dead end. I thought that was pretty good. It's cheesy, but the way Dalton says it, he kind of goes, "Oh yeah, looks like he came to a dead end," because he comes through the wall on a freaking conveyor belt that he's been a forklift that he's been impaled on. But yeah, it's I think more humor like that, the morbid kind, was better suited to Dalton. One thing I also didn't like is Dalton's look in this is very haggard. They just had some really bad outfits for him. There's a couple of decent outfits. I think his suit at the wedding was nice. I think the black shirt and the blue shirt, the dark blue shirt and the black pants he wears at the casino is nice. But his tuxedo in the casino scene is very sloppy and loose-fitted. It was very much of its time. But the problem was it seemed like it was off the rack. I don't know why they used that tuxedo. They should have just kept his tux from Living Daylights. That one was nice. But Dalton was better dressed in the Living Daylights than he was here overall. But his slick-backed Count Dracula hair, I don't know what they were doing. That was a bad idea. They should have kept his side part that he had in the first one. But anyways, License to Kill, solid Bond film, really good. I can't recommend this one enough. This one is good. It's not perfect. It has some rough edges. Like I said, some of the subplots are a bit much. The ending could have had another revision. And maybe some, little cheesy things like the ninjas and some of the sound effects could have been reworked. But solid entry. And of course, Benicio del Toro plays one of the youngest henchmen we've ever seen in a Bond film, and he's really creepy in this, so keep an eye out for him. And Carrie Lowell as Pam Bouvier is excellent. She's a tough and capable Bond girl, very much the first modern Bond girl in my opinion, and really good. I like her a lot. And Lupe is fine for the role she plays, and she does the job well. And the song by Gladys Knight, easily the best of Dalton's films and one of the best Bond songs of all time. It's like a remake of Goldfinger, but even more powerful in my opinion. Gladys Knight's voice just soars. Highly underrated, extremely violent, very, very rough, but a very solid film. And it's cool to see Bond go rogue, and it was done well here, because Quantum of Solace tried it. It wasn't very well done. Here, it's done really well. And it was the first time it was done. And that was part of its controversy. This is too violent. It's too Bond going rogue. Are you serious? Yeah, it's possible. Bond had a rebellious streak in the novels too. It's not far off. In fact, Dalton was reading the books when he was playing this role. And interesting note, David Hedison, who plays Felix Leiter, also played Felix in Live and Let Die. In fact, there's sort of a loose trilogy here. If you watch On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Live and Let Die, and License to Kill, that they, if you follow it from a character point of view, right, they have a loose connection because they reference Bond losing his wife in this one from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and Felix loses his wife, right? And the actor playing Felix in this is the guy from Live and Let Die, so there is a connection here. So watch License to Kill with Majesties and Live and Let Die, then License to Kill. It's like a trilogy of its own in a way, character-wise and, you know, plot thread-wise. The Bond films aren't completely connected, but they share some threads here and there. And that's a thread I saw through those three films. Timothy Dalton, after he finished Bond, there was a lawsuit involving the studio and the producers where no Bond film could be made for 5 years, and Dalton's contract expired basically. And they asked him back, and he said he wanted to do one more, but they said, Tim, you can't come back and just do one more. You have to do 4 or 5 more. You have to sign a new contract, because Cubby Broccoli really wanted Dalton back. Maybe some of the executives at MGM didn't at the time. John Kelly, I believe, was one of them, the big wig at the time, who rumoured to have not liked Timothy Dalton and they should have gotten someone else. But Cubby was like, nope, Dalton's the guy. He's bringing Bond into the future. So they wanted him back, but Dalton said no, because 5 more films, that's just too much. And Dalton was like, I think 49, 50 at the time, so maybe a little too late to do 5 films. 1, maybe 2 more. In fact, they had written a 4th one. In this book, The Lost Adventures of James Bond by Mark Edlitz, they talk about Dalton's unmade 3rd film and even his 4th film, Reunion with Death. And this is a fascinating book. I recommend it. If you're a fan of Dalton like I am, a hardcore fan, and you want to know what happened to this guy, the story of Dalton's departure from Bond is an unfortunate one, because it could have been really interesting. I really liked the script that was written for his 3rd film, and there's an outline for his 4th film, Reunion with Death. So we would have gotten Property of a Lady and Reunion with Death if those lawsuits with the studios and the producers hadn't happened. Because Dalton was contracted to play Bond up until 1993. That's when his contract expired. Property of a Lady was expected to be released, in 91, maybe early 92. And if they had started the next one in mid-92, it would have been released by, mid-93 perhaps. Maybe 94. But it's a shame that Dalton never got to do his 3rd film or 4th film for that matter. And Brosnan could have easily taken over after that. If in a perfect world, Dalton would have played Bond from 87 to 94, and Brosnan would have played Bond from 95 to 2002, like he planned, or maybe 96, because they would have started filming perhaps in late 95 once he got cast. So Timothy Dalton's tenure as James Bond came to an end prematurely. Brosnan steps in 1995 for GoldenEye, and I love GoldenEye. I wouldn't change it for the world. Had Timothy Dalton been in this, would have it been better? We don't know. But one thing's for sure, it would have been a slightly different experience. In fact, there's a really good deep fake of Dalton as Bond in this, and it's kind of like, oh geez, that would have been interesting, but leave it as it is. I mean, I love GoldenEye, and Pierce Brosnan does a fine job here. And GoldenEye was a cultural touchstone of sorts. I mean, because unlike Dalton, Brosnan arrived at a time when there had been a break for James Bond, because there was no Bond movies being made for 6 years. I mean, people were still expecting Timothy Dalton to return, whether or not they liked it, because he was the Bond on record at the time. But in '94, he announced his retirement for the role. He chose not to come back. So when Brosnan jumped in, people were like, oh, finally, he's Bond. We were supposed to get him ages ago. So it felt long overdue for Brosnan because the general public really wanted him, whereas Dalton was somewhat of an unknown. Dalton wasn't really a movie star name. He was a character actor, really, who had a lot of classic Shakespearean training. Pierce Brosnan, on the other hand, was more of a commercial type of actor, and he's good. Brosnan is a fine actor. I got nothing against the guy. But if you're looking for a deep James Bond, Brosnan is more of in the camp of Roger Moore. To me, he's similar to Roger Moore in a lot of ways, but with a lot more polish, perhaps, and a lot more suave. But he doesn't have the brute of Connery, if that makes sense, or the intensity of Dalton, at least not for my money. He's smooth, he's cool, he looks immaculate in a suit, he's incredibly handsome, a bit too much of a pretty boy for my liking, but still, I could see why people loved him at the time, and he was the right Bond for the right time, for the 90s, because in the 90s, there was this focus on men being the new age sensitive guy, right? While Dalton did explore a little bit of that slightly more compassionate side in The Living Daylights, Brosnan really doubled down on that. Brosnan really fit in the mid-90s for that Bond that people wanted. And he was seen as the more modern, polished, slightly more gentler Bond, I guess, because Dalton was so gritty and intense. People just wanted a more laid-back Bond. Still tough and capable in the action scenes, but a little softer, a little gentler in some ways. And, you know, that's the Bond he played. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but when you think of a secret agent super spy, right, one who's going to succeed on his mission, Brosnan, for me, ranks as the fourth best Bond. I see him above Roger Moore and George Lazenby easily, but behind Dalton, Craig, and Connery. That's the way I see it. He's fine. He's just fine. But this movie, GoldenEye, his first movie, which was formulated from the leftovers, more or less, of the script for Dalton's unmade film, because there's a lot of similarities from the original script that have been changed, of course. I mean, obviously they dropped the Hong Kong handover back to China element and the high-tech element, but there's the revenge element of the villain trying to get back on his home country is very much present and accounted for here, just switched in a different country. So what is the plot to this? The effortlessly suave and sophisticated Pierce Brosnan makes his acclaimed debut as Agent 007 in this espionage thriller featuring the most eye-popping opening sequence yet, when an MI6 agent, Sean Bean, turns rogue and plans world domination with a terrifying satellite weapon. Bond must pursue his former ally to Cuba, Monte Carlo, Switzerland, and even Russia, all while dodging a sexy, deadly femme fatale, Xenia Onatop, played by Famke Janssen, who will stop at nothing but to put the squeeze on the intrepid spy. Yes, Xenia Sergeyevna Onatop. Onatop? Onatop. I love GoldenEye. It is a throwback. It is more or less, it's hard not to love GoldenEye. It strikes a perfect balance of the suave, sophisticated Connery with a lot of the witty humor of Roger Moore. But it does lack in the intensity department. But then again, there are some very brutal sequences, particularly the fight with Bond and the villain Alec Trevelyan, aka 006. 006 versus 007, a former secret agent who has a vendetta against the British government. You know, it's a really good story, and Sean Bean plays a very compelling villain. Is he as charismatic as Franz Sanchez? No, but he's definitely an interesting character. I wish, in fact, there was more done with his character. His backstory is fantastic. Sean Bean does an excellent job in his role, and he's physically threatening. I'd say he's a good villain. He's very much easily the best villain that Brosnan ever faced. But there could have been a little bit more meat on the bones for his character. I wish there were more scenes with him, because he's off screen for quite a while until the second half. He starts off in the beginning and he shows up in the second half, and it's a bit spotty there and then. But in the finale, it's really satisfying. And I really like this film. The action scenes are incredible. I like the post-Cold War setting. We really get that feeling that we've transitioned out of the Soviet Russia, the Soviet Union. And all the characters are very eclectic, very interesting, very well defined, very well acted. I mean, the Bond girls, we have two very good Bond girls. In fact, two of my favorites, Natalia Semyonova and, of course, Xenia Zregievna Onatop, or just Xenia or Xenia Onatop. And Natalia, she's a computer programmer, and she's sort of caught in between Bond and the mission and the villains. By accident, really. She just happened to be a survivor from an attack by the villains. She survived this attack that Trevelyan and his cohorts committed against this research center. And they stole the GoldenEye firing key, which is a satellite that can emit electromagnetic pulse and destroy everything with a computer circuit. So they have hijacked this GoldenEye satellite, basically. That's what Trevelyan's plan is. It's a really good movie. Very tight, very well put together. There is some problems with it. This isn't a perfect movie, but overall it succeeds. And this is, oddly enough, the strongest debut for any of the Bond actors, in my opinion. Connery and Moore and Lazenby and even Dalton had adequate starts at best. Well, with the exception of Lazenby. I mean, Dr. No was a decent film. Live and Let Die was a decent film. The Living Daylights was decent. On Her Majesty's Secret Service, not for me. It's not awful, but it's just not for me. But Brosnan, I think, is the first Bond to benefit with a great first film. This is really tightly made. There's a few little issues with it, sure, but really relatively minor and not even worth commenting on. I could say some of the geography is a bit confusing in the opening scene, and some of the logics of that setup with how Trevelyan fakes his death and whatnot. So there's a couple of little things like that. And maybe some green screen that doesn't really hold up, like the sequence where Bond jumps down to catch the plane. It looks cool from the distant shot, but when you see the close-up, you can see that's kind of not very convincing today. But other than that, though, solid movie. It's hard to not love GoldenEye. It was definitely the coolest movie of the mid-90s, I would say. Definitely the coolest Bond film to that point. And you know what? It was so good that when the game came out, its popularity just elevated. And the game came out 2 years after this movie came out. Tomorrow Never Dies was already on its way, or it was out, I think, by the time the game came out for the Nintendo 64. And I own that game. It's fantastic. Still one of my favorites. Despite, of course, FPSs changing over time. But GoldenEye, intriguing story, great post-Cold War setting. It really feels like a natural transition into the new world this time around. Whereas Dalton's two films were trying to figure it out. They were kind of a transitional, experimental phase, so to speak. GoldenEye overall is a solid movie. 5 out of 5. This movie did gangbusters. The video game was popular. The characters all memorable. Boris Grishenko, of course, that hacker that works with Trevelyan. I'm invincible. Alan Cumming plays him. Even General Arumov, has memorable moments. Him getting wasted halfway through trying to escape from Bond in the tank. That tank sequence is crazy. Some people laugh at it now, but I love it. It's just perfect. Perfect Bond cheese right there. And it's done practically, so I love it. Valentin Zukovsky, shaken but not stirred, Mr. Bond. He's a memorable character. Robbie Coltrane, may rest in peace. So many memorable support characters in GoldenEye, and they make a lot of this movie. Brosnan's good, but the support characters are really memorable, and that's a rare thing. I have not seen too many Bond films with very memorable side characters, but this probably has the best of them all. Great henchwoman with Xenia Onatop, who, yeah, she's quite a character, and if you've seen the movie, you know what I mean, and I'm shocked this movie got a PG rating. I really don't know how this passed with a PG, considering it's not as gruesomely violent. There's a lot of sexual themes in this movie, especially with Xenia Onatop, who crushes her victims between her thighs. And there's a very high sexual element to this Bond film, surprisingly. And Brosnan at times, at least maybe not so much in this film, but later on, somewhat became a bit sleazier, kind of going back to the Roger Moore era in a sense. Granted, the women were not like half his age, but to me he always seemed sleazy, compared to Dalton or even Connery. He was more in line with Roger Moore, but a little bit more refined and a lot more capable in the fight sequences. But GoldenEye, classic Bond movie, a great debut for Brosnan. Sadly, I can't say the same for the rest of Brosnan's output. The following film he done, Tomorrow Never Dies, has some great ideas, has some great action set pieces, very polished. Brosnan is excellent, his haircut is better, and I think Brosnan's performance as Bond here is perfected. I mean, he was very good in GoldenEye, but he really was great here, I think. And even in The World Is Not Enough, he was great. But Tomorrow Never Dies, I don't like the villain in this. In fact, Elliot Carver is such a wimp of a villain and so over the top and cheesy. I don't care for his performance. So here's the plot. Pierce Brosnan returns as 007, cunning and devastatingly cool in this thrilling adventure. When a ruthless media tycoon, Jonathan Pryce, tries to destabilize the world economy by orchestrating a deadly standoff between world superpowers in an attempt to achieve high ratings for his media conglomerate, Bond must prevent World War III. Co-starring the gorgeous Terry Hatcher and Michelle Yeoh in this high-tech action adventure that will exhilarate Bond fans of all ages. This movie is kind of ahead of its time. This whole idea of a media mogul using his platform to stage, and really use the media platform to manipulate politics and, start World War III. It's an interesting concept, and it's very much ahead of its time, but it's not so much the concept or the story behind this that's the problem. The problem I have, really, is just some character elements here. For one, the characters in GoldenEye were so good, and the story was so tightly wound and intriguing, and other than a few technical elements with GoldenEye, there wasn't much wrong with it. This movie has a lot of character elements that just aren't as strong. GoldenEye was so strong with its characters that this just couldn't measure up. The action's good, Brosnan's cool, Michelle Yeoh is a great companion to Bond, his equal, she kicks a lot of ass, but yeah, just not as well-rounded though. Terry Hatcher is a Bond girl that shares a past with Bond in this, and I always thought this was a missed opportunity to bring back Natalia, because Natalia survives at the end of GoldenEye. This could have been an opportunity to bring a reoccurring Bond girl. They didn't do it, which is a big mistake, because Terry Hatcher's character dies and you don't really care about her, because you just kind of are introduced to her and you're just supposed to expect, oh, they had a past. I mean, it's not nice she dies, but just it doesn't have any impact from a dramatic standpoint. If Natalia was the girl in Terry Hatcher's role, it would have been far more impactful, because we know her from the previous film and we got to like her. So when she dies, it would have been far more impactful. But here, it doesn't work. The character of Elliot Carver himself, Jonathan Pryce's character, the villain, isn't a bad creation on paper. It's a great idea of this media mogul kind of guy using his platform to manipulate public perception and political opinion and whatnot, and thus creating a conflict. It's an interesting concept, but it's not well executed here, in my opinion, in terms of the performance of the character. I don't buy Jonathan Pryce as this media mogul guy at all. He's too whiny and wimpy and kind of pathetic, really. And there's a lack of callousness for this guy, who really, in my opinion, I just don't buy it. And I think he's a very weak and ridiculously over-the-top villain, especially for the story that they're telling here. It's a very intriguing setup. It's an intriguing story, but it suffers from a lame villain and Terry Hatcher, who's this Bond girl. She's gorgeous, but she's shallow, she's boring, she isn't very interesting. A step backwards in terms of progression, you know, for female characters in Bond. Granted, we do have Michelle Yeoh in there, thank God. But even as, you know, being the sacrificial Bond girl, she isn't very interesting. At least make them interesting, right? But they didn't do that here. Terry Hatcher is boring, and they missed the opportunity to tie a great character like Natalia, you know, who was a capable character. They missed an opportunity to have it be more like a death with some weight to it, some tragedy to it. They didn't even think to do that. It's a shame. There was a missed opportunity. The action's great. Brosnan's cool. Michelle Yeoh is good. The story is intriguing. But those two characters suck, and it feels too polished in a way. There's a lot of product placement in this movie. It feels too glossy at times. Like, I feel like I'm watching an ad, like the sequence where Bond uses his new BMW. Yeah, this is another thing I don't like. Brosnan's era is full of BMWs. BMW just isn't what I think James Bond should be driving. I can picture Bond driving a Lotus, which he has driven, the Aston Martin definitely, maybe even a Jaguar or a Maserati, but BMW, really? It's just kind of looks like a stock car. It didn't look really exciting to me. Not even the Z3, which was in GoldenEye, was that impressive, and it was not really used that much. But I mean, the gadgets on the car were cool and everything, and that sequence is cool, but there's a lot of those scenes where you feel like you're watching an ad for James Bond and not so much watching a James Bond movie. So there's this very commercial thing that's happening in Brosnan's period, and this continues throughout the series, which kind of annoys the hell out of me, and it reaches a fever pitch in Die Another Day. It's absurd. So I always felt Brosnan kind of became the product placement Bond after the GoldenEye. GoldenEye was a legitimately great Bond film, and it was a great start for him. This one signals a transition to me. It's decent. It's not a bad film. I'd give this one, 2.5, maybe 3. I'm a little bit indecisive. Actually, I'll give it a 3 because I think there are more positives to this. It's decent, but if you ask me, do I come back and revisit this one much? Not really. It's a 3-star movie, but just because it isn't bad. Like, it's not like Diamonds Are Forever. It's nothing like that. Its script is a little better than Living Daylights. So, but again, the villains suck, and there's a henchman Stamper who's generic and boring. Yeah, he's tough, and there's a good fight with Bond, I guess, but it's not very exciting. Like, the movie's finale, I always felt was boring. In fact, the first half of this is stronger than the second half for me. But it's okay. It's Brosnan's, I would say, last good Bond film, sadly, because as the movies progressed, they got worse. And that's a shame, because Brosnan, I think, was a good Bond, perfectly fine, acceptable. I was happy with him. He was my Bond growing up. He isn't my favorite as I've gotten older. I mean, I used to think Connery and Brosnan were the best Bonds growing up. But as time went on, Connery, Dalton, and Craig have become my favorite Bonds. you know, whereas Roger, Pierce, and George Lazenby are my least favourites. But I put Brosnan above Lazenby and Moore, without question. He's good. I think he's just fine. But I feel bad for him because he started on a high and went down. Dalton started average and went up. And he could only go up further because the License to Kill was a step in the right direction for him. And his third, I think, would have been on the quality of GoldenEye, because that's where the building blocks were before Brosnan did what became GoldenEye. But Tomorrow Never Dies, it's not awful. I just think it's kind of generic. It has some good concepts, but it lacks good villains. It's a bit too product placement and TV commercial-esque at times, but still worth a watch. It isn't awful. Brosnan's next film, The World Is Not Enough. This one, I don't know where to stand on it. Part of me wants to like it, but I just find myself going, this one just isn't memorable at all. The World Is Not Enough suffers from just being bland. There's a blandness to this movie. The locations aren't very interesting. The story is convoluted. It's telling really 3 stories. I mean, it's really trying to tell 3 stories at once. It's very, very overly written. They should have stripped it back a little bit. But let's talk about the story here. The World Is Not Enough is an exhilarating and sophisticated action-packed adventure. With insight and intelligence, the producers, writers, and director Michael Apted and Pierce Brosnan reveal a new and exciting dimension to a character that has been in the public consciousness for almost 40 years. And the film further establishes Ian Fleming's legendary creation as one of the most popular literary and cinematic characters. Brosnan returns as Bond, charged to protect a gorgeous billionaire heiress, Sophie Murkow, from the ruthless hands of a nuclear-obsessed terrorist who wants to control the world's petroleum supply. That's somewhat the story. I mean, Renard, the character, this is another missed opportunity. The villain, Renard, Robert Carlyle, seemed like he was going to be pretty intense. There's a great opening sequence where he's introduced, where he holds a hot rock in his hand. The guy's supposed to be impervious to pain. He doesn't feel pain. And that was an intriguing concept, but they don't do much with his character. This Brosnan was set up to be the Bond that was going to peel layers back and show more complexity to Bond. The stories were going to be more intricate and interesting, more back to some classic espionage. This one didn't really do it because there's a subplot involving Sophie Murkow's character and Robert Carlyle, and with Bond, there's this love triangle sort of, or hero-villain and villainess triangle. And the action scenes in this I don't find to be particularly memorable. The opening boat chase is pretty cool. I think that's one of the better openings. But again, there's just something missing to this. It's just not memorable. The villains aren't very good. And it has one of the worst Bond girls, absolutely. I mean, Denise Richards as a nuclear physicist. For one, I don't buy that. And 2, she can't act. This is a terrible, terrible performance and not convincing in the slightest. It's really awful. And again, the villains are nothing to write home about. The locations are bland and unmemorable. The action scenes, aside from that boat chase in the opening and maybe that helicopter that has the buzzsaw that cuts the BMW in half, was pretty good. And the return of Valentin Zukovsky from GoldenEye was a nice touch. But really, has some great ideas that aren't fully realized. Brosnan is really good though. I think this is probably his best performance as the character overall. He's really trying to make Bond more emotionally complex here. So I give him points for that. I actually saw this in the theaters when it came out. This was the first Bond movie I saw in cinemas. At the time, I wasn't that impressed. Even me, who was 9 years old, I mean, there were parts I liked. When I saw Valentin, I was like, oh, Valentin's back, you know, because I remembered him from GoldenEye. Even then, 9 years old, I knew that, you know, the characters were just kind of meh, because GoldenEye's characters were so good, you never forget them. They leave an impression. They're very well formed and defined, even if they don't have much screen time. Here, and even in Tomorrow Never Dies, you don't really get that. So it's a shame. I think Brosnan just had a hard act to follow after that great first start. We had a great first start with Brosnan, with GoldenEye, an adequate sequel, I guess, Tomorrow Never Dies, and then just meh with The World Is Not Enough. It's just meh. It's forgettable. It's not very memorable in my opinion. And I will say the song The World Is Not Enough by Garbage is okay. It's not one of my favourite Bond songs, but it's definitely better than Tomorrow Never Dies by Sheryl Crow, I think, which is a really bland and boring Bond song. I preferred the one, Surrender. There was an unused track that was much better than that. Brosnan's first film, GoldenEye, had a great song by Tina Turner. That's still his best Bond song. This one I'd give 2.5 stars. But this is just my opinion, folks. Strictly my opinion. And I'm just going off script. I'm going from the top of my head with my feelings when I'm talking about these movies. Brosnan's films were very profitable. People loved Brosnan as Bond, regardless of the quality of the film, so it seemed. So what do I know? So after The World Is Not Enough, in 2002 came I Guess I'll Die Another Day. I guess I die another day. Madonna's terrible ass song, and believe me, it sounds as bad as I just sang it there. Just picture some auto-tune on that shit. Really, Die Another Day, wow. Wow. This is Brosnan's equivalent to Moonraker and freaking Diamonds Are Forever. This one is truly trash. And directed by Lee Tamahori, who actually made a really good movie that I liked, The Edge, with Alec Baldwin and Anthony Hopkins. Not a bad little survival thriller. This movie, though, terrible. It takes a lot of influence from some questionable films of that time. I mean, this is the era of Michael Bay. Even Lee Tamahori, I think, admitted it in a production video. There's a lot of that fast-forward, speed-up, slow-down action in this. Very MTV music video-esque of that time. And that's just the beginnings of this movie's problems. But let's talk about the plot. James Bond, Pierce Brosnan, pulls out all the stops to take you on an unforgettable, adrenaline-pumping ride across the globe in this action-filled adventure. From a dark cell in a North Korean prison to the beautiful beaches of Cuba, 007 is on the trail of a diabolical genius who's hell-bent on slicing up the earth, literally. Now it's up to Bond, with the help of a sultry American agent, Jinx, played by Halle Berry, to put an end to the evil mastermind's plans. This movie, I saw this in cinemas, and I got to confess, when I was 12 years old when that came out, I went and saw it. I loved it. I thought this was Brosnan's best film since GoldenEye. What dope was I smoking to think that? Well, I wasn't. It was just me being 12 years old. This was terrible. Like, I watched it again years later. I hadn't seen it for a while. I loved it when I first watched it, but then I watched it again. I'm like, this is junk. And I don't know why I liked it. And you know why I liked it? It starts really good. The beginning of this movie, the first 30 minutes where Bond is in North Korea and captured, that's a great sequence. And I'm like, holy shit, this is awesome. I thought this was going to be taking Bond back into the grit and grime that we hadn't seen since the Dalton era or even the early Connery films. Nope. What happens? It becomes a cheesy Moonraker, Diamonds Are Forever type plot. The villain, Gustav Graves, has had plastic surgery or genetic alteration to look like a different race, and he's building a diamond satellite to melt the Earth. He has an ice palace. There's a invisible Aston Martin, a villain with diamonds in his face from an explosion. It's just absurd. Why has he kept the diamonds in his face, for God's sake? And there's cheesy one-liners, bad green screen effects. Halle Berry's Jinx, she's gorgeous. Yeah, she's capable in a cartoon superhero kind of way. but she's annoying. She's annoying. I can't stand Halle Berry's character in this movie. And Brosnan is cringe in this. It's like he seems upset, like, because in the first half, like the whole thing with North Korea, he's really invested. Then when you see him in the rest of the movie, he looks like he's having like, oh God, what's happening? It's like he's slowly discovering the movies as they're filming it. He's slowly discovering that the movie's getting sillier, and he's just getting more and more upset about the whole thing. But he agreed to do it. It was a big paycheck for him, and you know, he didn't really have any creative control over this. So let's also mention Madonna's terrible song. I mean, I've already mentioned in the beginning, it's just awful. And this movie frustrates me because this is sadly Pierce Brosnan's last Bond film. It was a massive hit financially, but critically, this was made fun of and torn to pieces. And for good reason. It's just a bad film with bad effects, a bad plot, going backwards. They were trying to go back to the Moonrakers and Diamonds Are Forever era, and I'm thinking, why are you going there? Going back to Man with a Golden Gun style. It's a shame. It really is a shame. And there are people who like it for the silliness. I'm like, sorry, this is too silly for my liking. If I want silly that's good, I'd watch something like Octopussy or You Only Live Twice, the more fantastical Bond that delves into fantasy sort of 50-50, not 100% like Moonraker or Diamonds Are Forever or this movie. Because to me, it's just too much, and it becomes unbelievable, you know, to the point when you see Pierce Brosnan windsurfing on a CGI tsunami, you start to go, what the actual am I watching? Because that's what this movie makes you go. I couldn't believe what I was seeing in this movie. It almost borders on science fiction, like flat out different genre. It doesn't even feel like a spy movie at times. And the one-liners are terrible. They're just like really forced and very, very bad. And there's a lot of repetition of gags. Like, I think Rosamund Pike has a sword. She goes, I'll try something. You know that joke about, let's get to the point, and you point a sword, that kind of joke? They repeat that at least 2 or 3 times. I think it's like 3 times, and it's just getting boring. Really, really, really silly. But is there any merit to this? Well, the opening 20-30 minutes is really good when Bond is captured in North Korea, and that whole action scene is really good. And there is a good sword fight with Gustav Graves and Bond, but that's it. Everything else is awful. The CGI and the effects are bad. Halle Berry's annoying. Brosnan looks pissed off and bored in the second half of the film. Ridiculous gadgets like the invisible car. It's just too much. And it doesn't make much sense because they're in the snow too. They could see the tire tracks. It's ridiculous. And yeah, there's just a lot of problems. And the tone dramatically shifts after the first 30 minutes, and it's just jarring like nothing else. But the movie made a crap load of money, so there was going to be another Bond film with Brosnan. So we thought. No, he never got to make his 5th film. Seemed like it was going to happen. Brosnan himself said that, yeah, there's going to be a 5th. Then it didn't happen. Now, Brosnan was 49 years old, pushing 50, but he still looked young enough to at least do one more. And I would have loved to have seen one more with him to just wrap it up and end on a high note. And sadly, he ended up on a worse note than Roger Moore did. He ended up on a bad note like Sean Connery did with Diamonds Are Forever. This is how bad it was. A View to a Kill at least had good villains. This had nothing of the sort. And the music is terrible, really. And the editing style is tacky and trashy. It does not hold up whatsoever. And it was a terrible end to Brosnan's tenure as Bond because he was good. I liked Brosnan. He's not my favourite, but I like him okay. He's perfectly fine and he's a good actor. To Brosnan's credit, he done a good job, I think, fundamentally. And he he was a good soldier. He worked through the series quite well. I like Brosnan, and I've liked a lot of his other films that he's done after Bond, so what can I say? Good job, Bros. I guess I better give Die Another Day a rating before I move on to Daniel Craig. I guess I better give Die Another Day a star rating. Well, I'll give it 1 star. I gave Diamonds Are Forever 0 stars because it's awful on every level. But I give Die Another Day 1 star because at least that first 30 minutes is good and that sword fight with him and Gustav Graves is good. But after Pierce Brosnan finished up his tenure as Bond, it was actually a very sad end for him because he was let go. Effectively, he was fired as Bond. It was a very cold phone call, apparently. So there's a whole video about Brosnan talking about it. He's done it a few times. He just said, yep, we don't know how to move on. You've been a good Bond. See you later. Click. That was literally it. Very cold. But they moved on and they wanted to reboot it to an extent. Enter Daniel Craig in Casino Royale in 2006. Casino Royale, for me, without question, is the next GoldenEye for me. Like, I see this, I mean, I didn't see GoldenEye in cinemas, but I grew up with it, so to speak, through videotape, and it was still considered very cool, like one of the coolest movies of the 90s. But Casino Royale was the first awesome James Bond movie I saw in cinemas, and I love Casino Royale. Daniel Craig's casting was controversial, though. They thought he was too short, too brutish looking, and blonde, blonde hair, and just not traditionally handsome, the tall, dark, and handsome Bond. But I think in Casino Royale, he looked quite good. He was very rough around the edges, but they were playing a more grittier Bond. I mean, Dalton had a bit of a grittiness to him, I thought, but Craig even more so. Does he have the classic Bond look? No. But does he nail the character? Yes, and even more so. Daniel Craig is my 3rd favourite Bond, and I put Connery first, Dalton second, and Craig third. He's in my top 3. And the only criticism I have with Daniel Craig, sometimes he's a little too invincible. Like, even here, he just crashes through walls, pulls nails out of his back like he's John Rambo or something. There's a lot of that, and sometimes he does mope a little bit too much for my liking. But mainly later on, though. But I still like him a lot, and he's very, very physical. He's funny at times, at least in the first one here, I think, and in Skyfall. Later on, I think the humor with him just started to wane. And I gotta say, I think Craig has aged the worst out of all the Bond actors. He's even maybe more so than Roger Moore. I mean, I think he was 50 when he finished Bond, but he really looked much older. I don't know. Craig just didn't age very well as Bond. But here, up until Skyfall, he looked, really good, and he was very much in his peak. This is the story here. Casino Royale introduces James Bond before he holds his license to kill, but Bond is no less dangerous. With 2 professional assassinations in quick succession, he has elevated 00 status, and M sends the newly promoted 007 on his first mission that takes him to Madagascar, the Bahamas, and eventually Montenegro to face with Le Chiffre, a ruthless financier under threat from a terrorist clientele who is attempting to restore his funds in a high-stakes poker game at Casino Royale. M places Bond under the watchful eye of the Treasury official Vesper Lynd. At first skeptical of what Vesper can provide, Bond's interest in her deepens as they brave danger together. Le Chiffre's cunning and cruelty come to bear them both in a way that Bond could never imagine, and he learns his most important lesson: trust no one. This is without doubt one of the best written Bond film. The story is so immaculate and complex. I love it, but it makes perfect sense. When I saw this in the cinemas with my parents, they were blown away by it. My mum loved this movie. My dad loved it. I loved it. This was a very important movie for us. My dad considers this the best, if not one of the best, at least, Bond films ever made. his Bond will always be Roger Moore, but Craig here done what Brosnan did and gave a great debut and more or less sustained that momentum for the most part. Casino Royale has incredible development. Craig is tough, capable, charismatic. He's got the humor where it counts. It's very sparse, but when it comes there, it's very good. But he is a little too invincible at times, and sometimes maybe a little too mopey, and he doesn't really look the part, the traditional Bond, but still very good. It isn't a deal breaker for me because he's just very good in it, and the movie built around him is excellent. I really love this movie. It's very light on the gadgets, and Le Chiffre, Mads Mikkelsen, is one of the most charismatic villains we've seen in a while. It's a very subtle and understated villain, but very memorable. Le Chiffre is very, very real. You feel this guy in a sense that he could really exist in real life. He's, to me, in the same league as Alec Trevelyan and Franz Sanchez of villains. You know, those really higher, realistic, the echelon of the more realistic villains. He's definitely at the top there. And I love it. This has some terrific action scenes too. There's a great foot chase in Madagascar and a whole bunch of other action sequences that are really good. And the poker game, I'm not a poker player, but I know the rules, and watching it in here, wow, it was like full of tension because, you know, if Bond loses the game, the money is gone and it finances terrorism. So it was really, really high stakes, this movie. I loved it. And the relationship between Bond and Vesper Lynd, played by Eva Green, who is unbelievable. She's smart, charismatic, witty, funny, absolutely gorgeous, without question one of the best Bond girls ever, if not the best. You know, she is definitely up there. Actually, she is the best Bond girl, I think. But fantastic movie, 5 out of 5, and it was a massive hit. Now, the follow-up to that was Quantum of Solace, and the thing about Craig's Bond films is they are all connected. This is the first time that each Bond film has a direct continuity from the last one. Now, Quantum of Solace, sadly, is a terrible Bond film. Craig started off really good, and this was a rushed sequel, basically a rushed follow-up. It came out only 2 years later, and I think there was a writer's strike when this was made, and it shows. Now, the plot, I'm just going to read it here. Daniel Craig returns on a non-stop quest for justice that crisscrosses along the globe. Bond meets a beautiful but feisty Olga Kurylenko, who leads him to Dominic Green, a ruthless businessman and a major force within the mysterious quantum organization. When Bond uncovers a conspiracy to take control of the world's most important natural resources, he must navigate a minefield of treachery, deception, and murder to neutralize Quantum before it's too late. This movie suffers from a lot of things. Daniel Craig is not the problem here. He's still on top form. Judi Dench as M, she gets a lot more to do in Craig's tenure. She's been playing M since GoldenEye by this point. And this movie's biggest problem is lame villains, once again. And bad editing, terrible editing, in fact. A Bond girl that is tough and capable, but not very interesting. She's just very bland. Olga Kurylenko is just not very memorable, in my opinion. She's just very generic. We've seen better tough Bond girls than this. And the story does follow on from Casino Royale adequately, but it's very messy. And this is the problem I have with it. And it's just not a very pretty film to look at. Aside from the editing, the locations are boring, a lot of desert, and it's just very bland and depressing to watch. It's just not very good. It's a 2-star out of 5 movie for me. I don't really have a lot to say about it because I really don't revisit this very much. I've only seen it maybe 2 or 3 times, and I really can't remember much. All I remember is Bond giving Dominic Green, the villain, a can of oil to drink in the desert when he leaves him in the middle of the desert. A pretty cold and nasty death, actually, but it's mostly left to your imagination. But not very good. It's a shame because we were riding high on the success of Casino Royale. This was a misfire. And yeah, 2 out of 5. Not memorable. It just suffers from being messy and bland. Fortunately, though, the follow-up, Skyfall, in 2012 was much, much better. And this was Daniel Craig's best since Casino Royale. Again, film number 3. Goldfinger, Spy Who Loved Me, Skyfall. Unfortunately, Brosnan missed that rule of 3 rule. He broke it for the first time, but we got it back with this one. But anyways, Daniel Craig is back as 007 in this 23rd installment of the longest film franchise in history. Bond's loyalty to M is tested as her past returns to haunt her. 007 must track down and destroy the threat no matter how personal the cost. When Bond's assignment goes gravely wrong, the agents around the world are exposed. MI6 is attacked, forcing M to relocate the agency. The events cause her authority and position to be challenged by Mallory, Ralph Fiennes, the new chairman of intelligence. With MI6 now compromised from both inside and out, M is left with one ally she can trust, Bond. Aided by a field agent, Eve, Naomi Harris, following a trail to the mysterious Silver, Javier Bardem, whose lethal and hidden motives have yet to reveal themselves. What a brilliant story. Javier Bardem's character is interesting but familiar. You know, I had a friend who compared him to Trevelyan. And that's a very fair assessment because there's a lot of similarity here. And there's a revenge plot from the villain on MI6. So that seems very familiar. But Javier Bardem does a great job here. Is his character completely original? No. There's a lot of Trevelyan influence mixed with a bit of Heath Ledger's Joker at times. But it's still a good performance, technically speaking. I liked it, and he was effective in his role. Javier Bardem is a great actor. The action scenes are excellent. Daniel Craig is in top form. The movie is engaging. It's exciting. The locations are beautiful. Bond gets his Aston Martin DB5 once again. It's great to see that back. And the music by Adele, the song by Adele is excellent. Easily Craig's best song. There's the other song, You Know My Name by Chris Cornell was excellent. But the one from Quantum of Solace, I don't even remember. It was just boring. But You Know My Name and Skyfall are excellent Bond songs and easily Daniel Craig's best. Massive hit. It was the first one, I think, to crack $1 billion at the box office and rightly deserved. This is an amazing film. 4 stars out of 5. It's just a slight step down, but really it's worth a watch. The only criticism I can give this movie, there's elements of it that feel recycled, particularly with the villain. But taking away that, it's a good film. I really like it. You know, I want to give it a 5, but I have to give it a 4, simply for the originality. There are some things here that I feel like we've seen before in some ways. Even hints of it in Stuff from the World Is Not Enough, with M being captured, and here she's under attack once again. It seems familiar at times. But still very good. I like this one. It's definitely Craig's second best film compared to Casino Royale, but that's great company to be in. Sadly, the follow-up to Skyfall was Spectre in 2015, and another not-so-great Bond film. It's not as bad as Quantum of Solace, but it's not much better. This one I give 2.5 out of 5. I'll read the story here. A cryptic message from the past sends Bond on a rogue mission to Mexico City and eventually Rome, where he meets Lucia Sciarra, Monica Bellucci, the beautiful and forbidden widow of an infamous criminal. Bond infiltrates a secret meeting and uncovers the existence of a sinister organization known as Spectre. Of course, Spectre is back, finally. Meanwhile, back in London, Max Denby, Andrew Scott, the new lead of the Centre of National Security, questions Bond's actions and challenges the relevance of MI6. led by M. Ralph Fiennes. Yes, that's right, Ralph Fiennes becomes M because Judi Dench, if you haven't seen Skyfall, spoiler alert, is gone. And it's a very emotional ending. Bond covertly enlists Moneypenny, Naomi Harris, and Q Ben Whishaw to help him seek Madeline Swan, Leah Sudol, the daughter of the old nemesis Mr. White, Jesper Christensen, who may hold a clue to untangling the web of Spectre. As the daughter of an assassin, she understands Bond in a way most others cannot. Bond ventures towards the heart of Spectre and learns the chilling connection between himself and the enemy he seeks, played by Christoph Waltz. Now, Christoph Waltz, of course, plays Blofeld, the new Blofeld, but they added a subplot that Blofeld and Bond are brothers. Now, when I say Bond and Blofeld are brothers, however, they are not biological brothers. They are adoptive brothers. And the whole story with that, I'm just not into. I don't think it was a good idea to do that. It just felt, like I said, a cheap idea. It doesn't fit. I really don't like when they do things like that. Oh, it's the brother. It's such a cliche. Now, look, I think it can work in some circumstances, but it doesn't work here, honestly. And the movie, I don't think, looks very nice. The way it's shot, and I can't believe this is directed by Sam Mendes, who done Skyfall, the best looking Bond film of them all. This one looks, I don't know, it looks sepia, I don't know what you'd call it. It looks like beer-coloured yellow or orange. The movie just looks like somebody pissed on the lens. It doesn't really look very good. And Daniel Craig looks bored in this one. Honestly, he just doesn't really look like he's enjoying it. And the script is just lacking fire and intrigue. And, you know, Christoph Waltz is a good actor, but his portrayal of Blofeld just doesn't hit right for me. The acting isn't the problem, it's the portrayal of Blofeld. I just can't quite grasp what it is that just doesn't work about it. There's just no menace. He has too much of a gentleness to him, at least in the beginning. Then when he finally does get his signature scar and lose his hair, he becomes kind of like a Hannibal Lecter character. And I'm just thinking, really? I'm just thinking that's a bit of a strange turn of events. And I just don't think it worked. But, yeah, and the song Writings on the Wall by Sam Smith, mopey, whiny, annoying, forgettable. Not a very good Bond song. And Madeline Swan, played by Leah Sudol, isn't a very memorable Bond girl. And yeah, I just didn't think much of her in this movie. And she comes back in the next one that Craig does, and with more success, actually. But here, just not very good. I do like Mr. Hinks, played by Dave Bautista, who's this big henchman, and there's a very memorable fight on the train with him. There's some decent action sequences here and there, but the story's just a bit muddled. Leah Sudol isn't that great. The Bond song isn't great. The look of the movie isn't great. The action scenes, they're functional, but nothing amazing. And Daniel Craig is just not really giving it his all. This is just a very bland Bond movie. This is another... I'll give this one 2.5 stars. It's watchable. It's better than Quantum of Solace, but that's not much of a compliment. So to me, this is another one of Craig's misfires. Not the best of his run, but it's not his worst. That will still go to Quantum of Solace. Now we get to Daniel Craig's 5th and final Bond film, and the final Bond film so far, No Time to Die, which the title sounds like a throwaway Pierce Brosnan era title. You know, like Die Another Day, Tomorrow Never Dies. It has Die in the title again. Yeah, it just felt like that. It's a fairly generic title. And this one took a while to come out because it came out in 2021. So it was a 6-year wait. That's the same amount of time between Timothy Dalton's last film and Brosnan's first one. A 6-year gap. But they still wanted Craig back, and they wanted him back for one more. And Craig had a lot of creative control on this one. And he didn't want to come back ever again after this one. And he made sure of that because the ending of this one divided a lot of fans. And I think it works within the context of this film. But it is one of those things where, yeah, they just killed Bond. I mean, really, that's what they did here. But let's talk about the story. Daniel Craig returns one last time as James Bond, starring alongside Oscar winner Rami Malek in No Time to Die. Bond has left active service and is enjoying tranquil life in Jamaica. His peace is short-lived when his old friend Felix Leiter from the CIA turns up asking for help. The mission to rescue a kidnapped scientist turns out to be far more treacherous than expected, leading Bond onto a trail of mysterious villains armed with a dangerous new technology. Yes, the villain here is a guy named Safin, played by Rami Malek. Rami Malek is a good actor. Sadly, he is not utilised well in this film. And there's just not enough screen time with him. That's really the problem. And I do think the finale with him and Bond wasn't as impactful as it should have been. I felt there could have been a better fight with these two. And there was a missed opportunity to say goodbye, Mr. Bond, one more time. Like when Rami Malek dies, he could have said, goodbye, Mr. Bond. It could have been a lot more like a homage to the old villains and also a very, legitimate moment like, shit, goodbye. The villain actually poisons Bond before he dies. Because that's what happens here. Bond dies. He gets poisoned at the end and he's about to die, but the missiles come and destroy him from, I believe MI6 who launched them. But he just kind of takes them. But there's good action scenes. Rami Malek, when he's on screen, is good. Jeffrey Wright as Felix Leiter. He's been playing Felix since Casino Royale now. Jeffrey Wright is an excellent Felix Leiter. I really like him a lot. Ben Whishaw as Q is great. And Léa Seydoux is better here than she was in Spectre. And there's still some problems with this film though, and most of that comes from, like I just said, the missed opportunity to have the villain have more to do. And Lashana Lynch's character is not awful in this, but it feels like a very forced character. I didn't care for her, and there seemed to be this agenda to have Bond being one-upped, but it felt very forced, let's just say. I didn't care for Lashana Lynch's character. And overall, it's a good film, I think. It's a 3.5 out of 5 for me. I think it's a decent closure to Daniel Craig's tenure as Bond, but it has little things here and there that kind of just throw me off. Mainly the villain and some missed opportunities to really pay homage to Bond's roots there, so to speak. And I didn't care for Lashana Lynch. But it's good. And the director, Kerry Joji Fukunaga, does an excellent job with the cinematography. This movie looks way better than Spectre did and Quantum of Solace, without question. It doesn't look maybe as good as Casino Royale or Skyfall, but it's better than the other two that weren't so great. So I rank this third best in Daniel Craig's tenure. So number 1 for me is Casino Royale. Number 2 is Skyfall. Number 3 is No Time to Die. Spectre would be number 4. Then, of course, the least favourite of those is Quantum of Solace at number 5. But Daniel Craig has had a fairly strong run as Bond, I think. He's had 2 classic Bond films, 1 decent Bond film here, and 2 not so great Bond films, and 1 being really bad, which is Quantum of Solace. But at its worst, it's just bland. That's the only issue I have with Quantum. It's not truly awful like Diamonds Are Forever or Die Another Day or Man with a Golden Gun and Moonraker. Well, that's my entire review of the whole Bond series, folks. I hope you all enjoyed it. This was a very long video, but I certainly hope you all enjoyed it. So, I'll see you when I see you. Stay tuned. Take care.